Who is Mason Clark?
Mason Clark is a 30-year-old man from Tennessee that is a professional Magic the Gathering player, but is a full-time coach, content creator, podcaster, done writing for a long time with Magic, and sort of just someone who really likes Magic and really likes sort of improving and loves game design. Those are kind of like some of the big Magic related stuff, and then like some more of the like the shape is like I'm pretty big into like movies, TV, anime. I like those sort of stuff. Big fan of music, so that's kind of like a good little spherical. Who is Mason Clark? That's me.
You're in Tennessee, right?
Yeah, I'm in Tennessee. I live in an area called Cookeville, which if you don't never heard of, like that's because no one has. I just moved out of Nashville, which is the capital, so I'm like 45-ish minutes away from Nashville.
Okay, that's not too far. This is something that's often, I think, very underappreciated. At least I feel like it's important. Is the ability you have to troll or to humor as a Magic player is very underrated. Like, how did you develop this? Is it just something that you were born with, or did it get better with time, like Magic?
Yeah, I would say it's interesting. So some people say like they have like a persona online or something like that, and I would just say that like the difference between Mason on Twitter and like Mason there when it comes to like trolling and jokes and stuff like that is very little. I would say that sometimes I just like switch off because I need a social battery recharge. But like growing up, I was like incredibly anxious, didn't have a ton of friends, and like card games, like specifically Yu-Gi-Oh, were a thing that like really opened the door for me. And eventually I got on Lexapro, and between therapy and some other stuff, I kind of got to the point where I've really, I don't want to say conquered, but I got to the point now where, my job is to talk and to like, have this kind of conversations. And, over the course of this podcast, I'll say easily more words than I said throughout all of high school up until that point, or excuse me, all of school up until that point. So like, it is something where it's very different, but I've always just sort of been me. And I always just sort of like, I don't know, I just do what I think is funny and what I like. And that's like something that is always sort of like been at odds. Like some people are like, oh, well, like, you would have more followers or have more opportunities where more people would do all these things if like you didn't like make jokes like that are just random or like tweet about anime or something. And it's like, yeah, but I don't care about that. Like I want it to be me. Like this is Mason Clark. I'm giving you myself. It is like,
it's like a one-to-one, you're offline and online, sort of.
Yeah, I mean, like, the only thing that really changes is that, like, offline Mason has more serious conversations about Magic and things, because people just won't have serious, good faith conversations online. It's not that I don't like them, they just don't consistently do it, and it's, like, really hard, I think. One, I think I'm a bad text communicator, and it's something I've been really trying to work on over the last couple of years. But two, I just think that, like, it's really hard to communicate via Twitter and stuff like that, and have really deep, nuanced conversations, and also to understand where they're coming from. So I just don't engage in it too much, which is, not the way I'd like for Twitter to operate. I got on Twitter originally to find things and to learn stuff. And now it's much more of like a funny little ha-ha, hee-hee thing than anything else. So.
Oh, totally. I mean, I wouldn't even say it's impossible to communicate well online. It doesn't matter how amazing you are as a communicator overall. It's just a lot of, I think you kind of alluded to it, just a lot of the nuance, a lot of the reading comprehension just goes out the window when people are trying to debate or win some sort of argument on Twitter or online. It's very challenging.
Yeah, and I think it's also really easy just to forget the other person as a person. And this isn't to say everyone, but I think a lot of people are trying to live their life doing what's right by them and their family, and they're trying to do like what's best, not everyone. There are obviously people who aren't that way, but I think a lot of people do come.
A lot of people try to do
faith.
the best they can, basically.
Exactly,
right?
Yeah, and sometimes they mess up, and sometimes like they don't even realize they mess up. I've definitely been in positions, where I would say I'm like pretty aware of these things, and then like only upon reflection I realize, oh, that could look totally different if you've had this life experience, which I've never had. I totally see why this person was, mad or upset. Like, recently had a thing online where a friend made some post that was like, what anime character to remind you of? And then like they replied underneath with like, no one will do this for me. And so I posted Shinji from Neon Genesis Evangelion, which I don't know if you've seen that one, but it's like a very
sad classic. Yes, I have.
It's a classic. Yeah, so he's like a sad, depressed guy. I forgot about all the stuff where Shinji does kind of in the later movies and opening scenes and some other things.
Or the end of Evangelion.
Yeah. I forgot about those things in the moment because he was just like sad boy posting. Right. And so I like posted Shinji and he's like, man, that kind of hurt my feelings. I can't believe you think I'd be Shinji. And I was like, what do you mean? And then I like thought about it for a little bit, and I was like, I totally forgot about all that stuff.
That's because
I'm
your
so sorry.
interpretation of the character is different from that other person's
Yeah.
interpretation, and it's just
Mhm.
like it's impossible to communicate that kind of, as you well know, the context and nuance of that, right? So
Yeah, it's really hard.
yeah.
So
So you kind of alluded to it, but how did you test the waters of being funny, like offline, before you made your way to Twitter and these platforms? Like, because I feel like someone's confidence, no matter what, whether it's humor or like playing a game, like there's some sort of validation from others, right? So was that fairly easy for you? Like when you said something, people thought it was funny, or was it another type of journey?
I think it was a little bit of that. I think I don't know, like I grew up on stuff like Adam Sandler and like Seinfeld and later in life Curb and Arrested Development and stuff like that. So I feel like I don't know, I've always just kind of been in tune with like making people laugh, and I feel like I typically have a good read on like what the other person finds funny based on stuff and stuff. I don't know. I wouldn't say I've ever really thought about it. I would say I derive a lot of self-worth and stuff intrinsically, and so a lot of the time I do kind of pick up like, oh, they don't really like that kind of joke, I won't make that kind of joke around them. And it's much more like I say things that make me laugh, and so I just kind of do it. I think some people really like when you like are true to yourself and you sort of just say things and you just have like a commitment, and like, you know, laughing at your own jokes is, I think, funny when it's like, you know, it's not like you're trying to be weird about it. You're just like telling jokes and having fun, and you know, I'm laughing at my own jokes and they're laughing. It's just like a good time. So I think a lot of people pick up on the vibe of like, oh, it's just like good fun, you know.
Okay. So it's like a modified version of the content creator's creed, like, you know, do something that you are entertained by. Sorry, I got my cat here.
Hello, kitty.
Yeah, he likes to get attention while we're recording. But it's like, the content creator methodology is like, do something that you would watch or you would enjoy. So kind of for you, it was like humor, like you would find it funny. So let's give it a shot, right?
Exactly. And I try to do that like all the time. Like if I'm doing something, it's because I like it and I think I would enjoy it. So like I recently made a video on like on YouTube. And I don't make like a ton of YouTube videos, but I made one that was basically like, what would modern look like if I think it was, I can't remember now, but gosh, it was like 2 months ago. But there was basically like this thought that people had brought on Twitter, and I was like, this is interesting. I'm gonna make a whole video talking about this. And I like, you know, made like a whole PowerPoint, a whole slideshow, and talked about kind of like what would modern look like if we didn't have, I think it was the evoke elementals as a whole or something like that. And I kind of just made a video about that. And like, you know, it didn't like blow the doors off anything or whatever, but like people said they really liked it, and I'd much rather make something that like, you know, one person besides myself really enjoys as well than make something that a lot of people are like, oh, that was cool, and they like kind of keep moving, you know. Like I watched Honorog Doss stream, and I like joined his chat, and he was like, dang, someone should really make a YouTube video out of this game one, talking through it and stuff, you know, and like that'd be a really good piece of content, you know. And I was like, yeah, that sounds like fun, I'll do that. And so I like blind reacted and talked through it like it was coaching, and that was like a really cool video where I can sort of show people like, hey, this is what a little bit what it's like. And it's cool because I don't think people make videos like that. I think it's hard to consistently make stuff like that. I think the environment doesn't reward it. But I had a lot of people be like, oh, I really loved that video, where I've rewatched that video. That video was very helpful. And to me, that's so much better than like, I don't know, I make a video where I play coffers through a league and I talk to you about coffers, and it's like just homework, you know. And some people really love doing that, and there's a great need for that kind of stuff. I don't want to say there's not, but for me personally, it's just like the world doesn't need another white man telling you about cabal coffers or rhinos or something, you know. It's, we got enough, let's move on, you know. And so I'd much rather talk about like what happens if you know, banned all the elementals, or like, you know, what's my opinions on the modern ban list, or what's my opinions on Pioneer, or like Magic as a whole. So like that kind of stuff is the things I want to do. And I, like you said, content creators creed or whatever, right? Like make things that you would want to watch.
Yeah. I mean, now you're speaking my language. Like from one spike to another, I feel like that is the stuff that it's challenging, because you're always trying to do things as a creator that gets traction and gets engagement and views. And I know those things don't hit as well as some other types of content. I'll just say that. But I really love that stuff. Like I hope you excuse me for invoking names of like former Magic players or maybe our contemporaries. But for a while, I remember like Matt Sperling doing that very well with
Mm-hmm.
his channel, like analyzing certain plays or like actual turn by turn. I think Paulo Vitor PV before he shut his YouTube channel down, like he was doing some good stuff there. Obviously you're doing some good stuff. Like I like watching those kind of like
Mm-hmm.
breakdowns of actual like how do you navigate the turn, what are you trying to play around, like that's I find that super interesting. But I'm
Yeah.
just trying to I guess the question for you here is like, is it interesting just because you're doing it and you enjoy it, it's like intellectually challenging, or do you have to also balance it with like, you know, the things that people are into? Because I think traditional like competitive Magic content thinking requires you to kind of simplify, to give somebody a deck list or a sideboard
Mm-hmm.
guide or, you know, convention ABC, right? Is it difficult to like do these kind of things and kind of go on the limb and maybe find out like, hey, maybe there isn't as much interest in it, even though I myself am very interested in it?
Yeah, I think so. For a long time, I had like a traditional job. I did stuff, um, but in that, like, was supplementing income, and now I'm full time Magic, and it's interesting because now that my like income is tied to Magic, I think the incentives get a little bit more perverse, right? Before, when it doesn't really matter how the content does, I can do whatever I want, however I want, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
like, well, this is just a passion type thing. But now there's a little bit of difference. I sort of still just have decided to operate under the thing that like I'm gonna do what I want and what I think is right, and I'm hopefully it's gonna pay off. I'm incredibly lucky and blessed that things have worked out that way, and I have sort of, I feel like, carved out a niche of and try to cultivate a thing of like Mason is like fun and he's gonna joke around with you, but like when you have a serious conversation, it's gonna be serious, and we're gonna really kind of dive into the nuance and sort of what matters. And I have a really big, you mentioned like talking about like, oh, there's this real demand for like sideboard guide versus like actually understanding something, and I try to always sort of meet in the middle. So when I did like well with four color Yorion back when I won DreamHack Dallas, I like I made a forever guide, which was basically a sideboard guide that had a little breakdown of like 3 or 4 sentences, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less on each matchup. And it was $20, and it was just forever was the idea. Like until I said until Yorion gets banned, you buy this, you get this, right? And it really gave me a sort of thing where it's like, hey, like I am getting paid for this. They are getting the deck list, and they have the ins and the outs. And if they want it, I can lead the horse to water of like, here's a little bit of a breakdown and a small understanding of like what matters in the matchup and why. And I try to always just do that. So sometimes my sideboard guides take me a lot longer than maybe they would someone else, but I feel a lot better about the product because it's like, listen, I am sure 90% of people, at least on the first glance, they open up the sideboard guide, they download the deck list, they look at the ins and the outs, and then maybe after playing a little bit, they'll go back and read what I wrote. But I'd much rather add that extra, 6, 8 hours, whatever it takes me, to like add in all the other stuff, than not have it and just be like, yeah, sideboard guide, sideboard guide, sideboard guide, and just like crank them out over and over again because that doesn't feel like what I would want. So I just don't do it. Does that answer your question?
It does. And it actually reminds me of the conversation we had before the recording about
Mm-hmm.
like how well you're targeting competitive Magic players in terms of the pool analogy. Like how deep are you in the
Mm-hmm.
pool? The sideboard guide I would say is like on the what's the analogy? Like the shallow end of the
Yes.
pool, where like
Yeah.
it's the level one, like, okay, I'm gonna start with this, and if you want to go deeper and really understand why things are the way they are, then maybe there's a coaching conversation, maybe there's some attempt to like, I think you mentioned in another podcast, like you calibrate different sideboard guides of the same deck to try to understand like where the truth is, right? Try to
Mm-hmm.
arrive at the truth. And if you want to go deeper than that, there's like even more things you can do. Like, okay, now that you become a master of this deck, what can you do that actually is like next leveling your opponent who expects you to do something, and then you're kind of like dealing like this sort of like curveball to them. Like there's lots of ways to do it, but I think it starts with having. There's nothing wrong with starting with a level one and having a sideboard guide or like a intro. I think that's really good for that.
Yeah, I think like there's a lot of things that are really cool about Magic. And you just mentioned one of them, like, okay, if the normal play patterns are about this, then like maybe my standard deck's gonna play this card because it breaks those conventions,
Exactly.
Like I'm gonna play this artifact creature as a 3/3 because I'll just go for the throat and cut down. That's really cool. That's really awesome. Magic's a great game for that. And that isn't as deep in the pool as I would say some things can get, but I think to get there, you really need to understand everything else. And it's a lot of it's like kind of building a pyramid, right? Or making a house. You know, if you have a poor foundation, it's gonna crumble. Or, you know, maybe only stand up for a little bit, but things might change, and then suddenly you don't have actual skills. Something you became like a one trick in a certain deck, and then that deck or archetype becomes less viable, and your house crumbles, right? So I think really understanding the fundamentals and the basics, and understanding why we make the choices we do, that is so much what matters to me. You know, I talk to people a lot about coaching, like I don't really care about winning and losing. Like I like competing, but like what I care a lot about is why did we make the plays that we did, and how did we come to those conclusions? You know, and I think it is much better to have like a good thought process or a defendable reason for everything you did than it is to win the tournament. Like I'd personally much rather like have medium results and, you know, do well for like, you know, do well-ish for a year than consistently spike tournaments, not really understand why, or be getting lucky or something, and maybe just like, you know, not having a good understanding of what makes this good. Because I think I want to be able to have skills to pick up and a good understanding to pick up anything and then play it, right? So like with this Amalia deck last week for the RC, you know, that's something that some of the people I coached had a little bit of issues with, because they had never played like sort of a creature-y combo deck that also threatens this kill out of nowhere, right? So when I tried to help one of them, because I had like a little testing team for people that get coaching, and we kind of like did our own little thing, which was a cool experience. But one of them, she was struggling, and I was like splinter twin them, and she didn't understand what that shorthand meant, right? Mm-hmm. And what I meant was like, hey, apply pressure and threaten to combo them the moment they tap out, you know? Mm-hmm. And once I taught her that and showed it to her like in a game, it instantly clicked, you know? And now I think she has like a one building block of that understanding of like how that little thing works. But understanding that doesn't matter if you can't attack and block, and you can't figure out what cards matter in the matchup, and how to sequence, and how to land drop, and how to, you know, build a reasonable sideboard, and how to mulligan. These are the core skills that allow you to do the other stuff. So
many questions I need to ask on top of what you just said, but I'll try one at a time.
All right, nice.
That Splinter Twin example and Amalia example is really a really good one, because it begs the question: what should one do as a Magic player to even get the foundational or the fundamentals? Like, mm-hmm. Is it playing certain decks in certain eras? Is it reading literature from certain eras? Is it attacking and blocking, as you said? Like, mm-hmm. What is it?
There's a lot, and I think I wish there was like...
I wish there were 5 hours, right? No, that's...
Yeah, I wish there was like some masterclass type thing or some area I could point you to, but I think... And I really personally, like, this being my like job, you know, like for those that don't know, they're listening, like my full-time job is like I coach about like, you know, 35 to 40 hours a week. That's kind of what I do. And I wish, and I'm working on trying to get it more distilled and more refined, but I think that like where I would say to begin with is like attacking and blocking is a huge part of Magic. And it is something that matters a lot because there's so much to the game. It's about creatures and the board. So that's like one part of it. And I think like really engaging with combat and figuring out those sort of things.
So that's like the Karate Kid wax on, wax off. Like you should probably just even like go through combat math and mm-hmm. and get familiar with a ton of like, just, I don't know what's the right term, like just a lot of repetition on like certain situations, like how to attack into or how to defend and that kind of thing.
Yeah. And like one thing I tell people early on is like, try to think about, can I make an attack here that sets up an attack on the next turn? So to give like a very quick rough example, like let's say I have a 4/4 and some 2/2s, right? And you have a couple 2/2s. Well, the board's kind of locked up, and I can offer my 4/4, and maybe like, you know, if I hit you, it might not matter this turn, but it might be setting up lethal later. Or I get my nice clean 2-for-1, and then I can slam in with more of my 2/2s, right? Where I can make a big alpha attack, and I'm going to push more damage, you know? Maybe the example gets a little more complicated, where I have a 3/3, a couple of them, some 2/2s, right? So what happens, I think, a lot of times, and a sort of shared experience I think we all Magic players have, is you like, the end of the round, you're like, what is going on? And you walk over, and there's like this clogged board state where both players have a million things, right? And I think a lot of times what happened is, not always, but a lot of the times, someone missed their opportunity to start attacking and getting in with like, you know, that old growth troll, that Cavalier of Thorns, that, you know, one Rhino token, and they missed the opportunity. And so I tell a lot of people like, hey, like try to pay attention on where you can start making attacks. And something I learned that was really helpful to me was like, you're probably attacking a turn too late, was something that someone told me a long time ago. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I always try to think about, like, if it looks like I can't attack, I ask myself the question of, am I missing an attack?
Mhm.
So that is something, sometimes there are not any good attacks. But
I think
times,
sorry to interrupt you, but that speaks to incremental advantages, because sometimes that extra 2 damage just decides the match, essentially.
Yeah. I mean, like, if I get in for, like, let's say 2 damage a couple times because you don't want to block or whatever because you think I have an Aganjo or a Wandering Emperor that gives first strike or something, and I'm bluffing you, or I want the trade, right? And, like, I hit you for, like, let's say 4 damage over 2 turns. Suddenly, my dragon or this kill spell I draw matters a lot, or your kill spell matters a lot less, right? And instead of being able to beat down on me, you're like, well, I'm at, like, 6 now. I can't attack with as much as I want to because Mason got in that 4 damage earlier. So I think that's really important. The next thing that I constantly tell people is that, like, big picture thinking of Magic is the thing that I think people don't practice enough. And Magic players are historically awful at practicing. They just play games over and over again, and they're like, this is the way to improve. I'll just play a million games. And it's like, it doesn't really work that way. If you're not thinking about things, you don't have a purpose, or if you're not reflecting on them, it's not going to help you, I talk about, and I typically use my friend Misplaced Ginger as an example in coaching of, some people think they need to play like Derek does and just play 40 hours of Moto a week, and that's the only way to get to the Pro Tour. And I think Derek is more the exception than the rule. He's just someone who's kind of, like, out there, and people know. I think that, like, actually thinking about sort of how these matchups play out, what are the cards that matter, what are the strengths of my deck, what are the weaknesses, why is this deck the strongest deck, understanding those kind of things, that matters so much more than, like, playing a bunch of games. Your first, 50 games of your standard deck matter a lot. Your first 100 games of your modern deck matter a lot. Your 500th game of Murktide probably isn't giving you the insight that, like, spending 30 minutes and just, like, reading over Rhino's deck list and being like, so this is how they are all building their decks. I think they might sideboard like this against me. How might I sideboard differently? Or, like, does this make sense for me to play my games in that way? And do I want to have this card instead of that card because of this, right? And those sort of things. And then going out and testing with friends and, like, actually testing, and being like, hey, let's engineer scenarios where, like, these Rhino players are all playing, Night Pack Ambushers, a new card is popping up in sideboards, right? And, like, let's assume you think this is for the Murktide matchup for whatever reason. It's like, hey, Steve, put Night Pack Ambusher in your opening hand, draw 6 other cards, and let's play, and let's see what it's like, because I think that card probably doesn't matter against me, but everyone seems to be doing it, and I kind of want to test it, right? Or maybe I think that card is the Stone Colds against me, and I think that, like, it's going to be too hard to have, answers for your Rhinos and answers for this card, blah, 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 blah. And play, reflect, and think, and very much take, like, the scientific method from high school, right? Form a hypothesis, test your hypothesis, reflect, and, repeat the process. And be like, okay, thought these things, here we are, this, Jerry Thompson kind of calls this, like, the truth of the matchup in some ways. And it was something that, like, when he said it on Game, I think it was, Jerry's podcast has had so many names, right? But I think at this point it was called Game. And when he said that, it clicked to me because that was something I had been doing with other stuff, but didn't know how to verbalize it, And when he said those words and kind of talked about it a little bit, I was like, oh, this is what the thing I've been doing is. Like, trying to figure out, like, what matters in, like, a few games and then exploit it. That's the truth of the matchup. That's what I should call this thing, And sometimes I call it, like, macro game planning now in coaching, but,
Yeah, macro, or sometimes I think I don't know if this is exactly the same concept, you have to tell me, but it's sort of like just saying, like, what's the game plan? How do I plan to win this matchup? Like, what are the keys to winning the matchup? And it's just thinking beyond, like, oh, what am I going to mulligan this hand? Am I going to attack this turn? Like, it's basically, what's my comprehensive macro, right?
100%, yeah. And I think, like, there's a lot of things that matter for, basic, like, beginning and the foundation stuff. The big thing I would tell people is slow down, think through your turn, be precise, and, like, try and form game plans. I think we talked about it earlier. Sideboard guides, I think, are legitimately a great tool, and it's not because the lights are on because of it. I think they are a great tool for people who have a lot of things going on, and just in general want to get insight from someone. I don't think I've ever seen anyone who wasn't, like, myself or someone I've talked to who, like, writes their own guide before or after buying someone's guide, but before reading it, and then compare notes. Like, that was the thing where it'd be like, okay, I've bought, let's say Jesse Robkins sideboard guide, right? And so I pull up her breach deck, but before I read anything else, I look at her breach deck. I know the 10 matchups that are there. I'm like, okay, this is what I think and why, and I'm going to write this out, or at least have it in my head. It doesn't need to be actually written, but I'm going to think about it. And then I'm going to read what Jesse said, and I'm going to assume that the very smart person who I paid money for was right, and be like, okay, why did I think this, and she thought this? And I assume she is right, and we'll work from that conclusion. Oh, she mentioned this in her article about, Unholy Heat actually doesn't matter a lot. I thought it would. That makes a ton of sense. Urza Saga might outgrind them. It's going to be hard for them to leave in a lot of those cards. I've learned something, right? So that's something where I tell people that people don't work on making game plans enough, and they just play. And, having an idea gets you so far. And for a long time, I've been a true believer that plan beats no plan every time. Plan versus plan, things get a little bit more complicated, but if you and I play 100 games and you just play your cards and I have a plan in the matchup, I'm going to win a majority of them unless the matchup is truly lopsided in your favor.
Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting because as I've talked to a lot of competitive players on this podcast, there are kind of two extremes, right? On one hand, you have somebody like Misplaced Ginger, aka Derek, who, by the way, he has a solid foundation for Magic. So it's just because I see him play a ton of matches doesn't mean that he doesn't already have fundamentals from the previous years or decades that he's played Magic. But you do have people that play a lot, and then you have someone like Hall of Famers or pros, someone like an Alexander Hayne who says, you'd be surprised how little I play Magic and how much I just think about Magic, right? I guess the question is it just about getting the baseline or 10,000 hours of Magic first before you can make a decision to grind harder or to think harder? Or is it all moot if you don't have the foundational experience, I guess is the question.
Yeah, that's a great question. And really quickly, I want to say, I think I have a lot more respect than the average person for Misplaced Ginger. I put him very highly, and he's my
me too.
friend.
Like, I love his stuff, and I love how he plays Magic, so I'm not trying to throw any shade at him,
Same. Yeah. I just want to make that very clear. I have a lot of respect for Ginger, and if I wouldn't use him as the example if I didn't have, respect for him. And I think it's much more just, like, he is playing so much, and, like, a great comparison actually is another Canadian, Hayne, right? Like, Hayne, when was playing Magic, barely played, and Ginger plays all the time. Hayne is better than Ginger. They would all agree to that, whatever. I've heard them have the conversation before. But, like, it is not, like, so disparate, right? But they just approach things very differently. So I think to answer your question, it's really interesting, and I've thought about it a lot recently because I was listening to Hikaru talk about something with chess. I can't remember exactly what now, but basically he was saying, like, if you didn't start learning, like, these kind of things before you were, like, 4, then give your dream up on being a grandmaster. There's more to life, and you can be an IM and be very happy, And that made me really think about Magic, where it was, like, interesting. I wonder how much early on teaching these people to think about big picture planning and to come up with game plans helps them versus hurts them, right? Because in some ways I am sort of giving a child a power drill, right? Where it's like, come up with a plan, and they're like, and they, like, try to, like, be like, I'm gonna never play into days or whatever. And it's like, well, you're gonna be off curve and lose the game. Sometimes you have to play into days, But I love where your head's at, kid. So I think that, like, when you asked me that question, my answer is sort of like, I think if I could have the ideal sort of Magic player, I think they should be thinking about those things kind of like Hayne does, but they should be grinding like Ginger does, so they get to the point where they feel like they've sort of hit the natural cap for whatever format they're competing in and the sort of games that are going on there, and then they should start to balance it more out, I definitely think, like, on the scale, I fall, I think, almost to a fault on the, like, Alexander Hayne part of the thing, where I play significantly less Magic than I probably should. I should probably be grinding more, especially for competitive events. But I have always sort of taken the, like, thinking about things, focus testing, and then going into a tournament, And so I think I would probably be better off if I did, another 5 hours of preparation before an event of actually playing. But I do think that, like, once you sort of get the foundational skills down and you do have those strong understandings of Magic at a core, you can pick up and play these other decks, and you can really focus on game plans and think out things beforehand, and then focus on tight technical play in the game. One of the things I typically tell people in coaching is that, like, no matter what game you're playing, if you want to, you can, like, practice planning through your whole turn and tight technical play in every game. You and I are Cuban. we can, you can practice those things while still having fun if you want to. Obviously, don't ruin the vibes or whatever, but you could do it. Same thing, you and I are playing at an RCQ. We could have that happen. So I'm just kind of the belief that like I prepare more by thinking, in the actual in-game decisions, I've sort of thought about those things, how the games play out, sort of what matters, and then I use those things to kind of inform where I stand, and then I make the choices in game. And so when I'm preparing for tournaments, typically it's to get like, when I play games, it's often to see like something I can't imagine in my head, or something I don't really know the play pattern for, and I try to get understanding, or it's me trying to get more sample size to like understand more scenarios to think of. And then when I play the tournament, I really try to think through what the decisions and like what other plays have meant, because I just don't have the time to grind like someone like Nathan would, I think, to like, or Ginger, to like really get that understanding of every little minute detail. So I need to sniff it out when I'm playing, but I have the faith and the confidence that I can do that pretty well. And I just need to prepare well beforehand on the other things so that I can focus solely on playing. And I can be like, yeah, I understood sort of what mattered in this matchup we went in. And then it was my job just to, orchestrate the game to play out the way I wanted it to. So.
Was there something about you or your lived experience before Magic that allowed you to have the confidence to think through things rather than rely on grinding and repetition? Like, I'm trying to figure out what makes Mason, right? Because we all have a different starting point. That's where my curiosity comes into play.
Yeah, I think about this a lot, and I know that one thing when it comes to specifically like thinking about games and kind of like imagining them in my head and playing through them and processing them is like, earlier in this conversation I mentioned how I didn't have a lot of friends growing up, but like I did play Yu-Gi-Oh! And like other card games was one of the few ways to socialize. And my parents got divorced, as everyone, from the 2000s parents did, it seems. And when my parents got divorced, I would sometimes play with my neighbor friends, like the Yu-Gi-Oh cards we had or whatever. But then I would be at my dad's house, and like, I wouldn't know anyone. He lived in like a condominium for a while before he bought a house, and so it was this whole thing. But eventually, he like brought me to an actual LGS, and like I went and I played a pre-release, and I started playing weeklies, and I like actually started playing in tournaments. And I didn't really have any way to practice, and like my other friends who were like, kids didn't really want to play in those sort of things, and I was very bad. Let me make this incredibly clear. This is not some prodigy story you're about to hear. This was Mason was getting crushed. I think I won one of the junior locals ever across like 3 years. I'm not even sure if I won, actually. I might have maybe just got second, but I know I made the finals of at least one. But anyways, I would play games in my head a lot because I had no one else to play with. And I would think about why I would lose and like why these things would happen to me. And I didn't ever, I think, come to like great conclusions, but I know that sometimes I did figure things out. Like, oh, the reason they made their play is because they had like, there was a Yu-Gi-Oh called Sakuretsu Armor, which would kill an attacking creature. And it's like, they wanted me to attack in. And so the only reason they would ever make something that looked dumb is because it favors them. And that was like a learning moment for little Mason. And then I ended up quitting playing, going to high school and coming back. But I think that's part of it where, and I ended up playing other card games and other video games and stuff throughout life. But a lot of it is like thinking about like how do things play out in interactions, and also just kind of like, I've always been someone who sort of like thinks very visually and processes things very much in like a visual, not text-based way. Actually, at this last RC, I was playing this new board game that's coming out with my friend Abe, and he was just beating the crap out of me. We had like
Is this Abe Stein?
Abe Stein, yeah, from the CC podcast. And it's this really cool like rock paper scissors variant. I don't want to say the name because I'm going to butcher it, but I'm going to tweet about it a bunch. I've pre-ordered it. It's super fun, and I just could not win. And his friend Jonathan Sukenik was there, and Sukenik was like, everyone, like, the third game is when people really start to get it, And I was like, we'll see about that. And not in like a, I'm going to get it before then, and like a, I think it's going to take me more time than the average bear.
Oh, okay. I thought it was chip on your shoulder. I'm going to get it by the second game.
No. It was very much like Mason understands he is not good at like reading these things and figuring it out. He needs to live the experiences a little bit. And like by like this, I think it was like the 7th or 8th game, I've lost all of them. And I stand by the fact that it was like a makeshift version of the game. Definitely lost me one, but I don't think I would have been winning a bunch. I don't think I had a good understanding. And I like looked at Abe and I'm like, what is actionable feedback for me to improve at this game? Because I don't know what I'm doing wrong. And he explained it to me as like, it's a fighting game. and you should think of it like neutral in a fighting game. And he knows that I watch like a little bit of Street Fighter, but like a good amount of like Melee. And so as soon as he said that, I won the next 2 games back to back because I suddenly understood what mattered in the game because he gave me like a frame of reference so that when we were playing in my mind, I could imagine like if this was a fighting game, Abe is disadvantaged in neutral right now. So I get to punish and he's going to have to either try to counter or move back, but it doesn't make sense for him to move in. So he's going to move back. So I'll do this, and like that sort of thing is like kind of how I think. And so I definitely think that 1, I'm a very visual learner. 2, I have had a lot of experiences growing up where I didn't have people to play with. And so I did a lot of thinking and being introspective, which I think I am in a lot of parts of my life. And 3, I think that like in general, and people who get coaching from me will tell you, I think about things in a very unique way. If you haven't already heard from like all my comparisons here, sometimes I view things in a very unique light. And I just don't shy away from that. That's just the way I see the world, and I don't hide it. It'd be like, oh yeah, I'm
unapologetic.
Like,
that's just what you think.
I'm me. That's your clip for Twitter. Mason's me. So that's what it is.
So it sounds like you're good at putting together frames of reference. You're good at like associating one thing with another, or is it fair to say pattern recognition or creating frameworks for understanding a game or rule set?
Yeah, I think creating a framework and like a framework and rules of understanding is a good one. And I do think pattern recognition is something I am pretty good at. I wouldn't say I'm like out of this world at it, but I think I am better at like relating to people and scenarios, for example, better than pattern recognition. I think I'm pretty good at pattern recognition. So
yeah. This actually reminds me of recently when I interviewed Kai Buddha. Kai, who is obviously one of the all-time Magic greats.
Goat to goat. That's why the comparison happened. Yeah.
I was extremely surprised because I asked him like, are you just naturally talented? And he said no. Like I just out prepare everybody else. Like I just outgrinded everybody else. He says if you're looking for the best intuitive Magic player that can learn a game quickly and figure out like a new mechanic or new format, that's not me. That's someone like Finkel. That's somebody, our mutual friend. I dare say, like, he didn't say it, but I feel like someone like Jonathan Sukenik is someone who's very intuitive as a gamer. Like, he can pick up things so quickly. I don't know as well. I don't know Abe as well, but I definitely know Jonathan is in that category. He's much more like of an intuitive Magic player. Like some of the things I've heard him say in terms of Magic stories, it just blows my mind, right?
Yeah, Sukenik's insane.
Just like how he won this entire like limited portion of a PT just by like bluffing his opponent the entire tournament, and how he just reads like the spoilers for a new limited set like on the flight over to a PT, and he just like 3-0s the draft, and it's just like. There's some unbelievable stuff. Anyways, this is not a podcast about Jonathan. I'm just trying to say that there are some players that like are very heavily on the preparation side, and some players that just seem to have like this sort of like intellectual horsepower or intellectual intuition, and you're kind of like a balance of the two, right?
A little bit, yeah. I would say this, that if like Sukenik is like a Ferrari or something when it comes to those sort of things, I'm much more like a BMW. I'm not shabby. I can go fast.
This is the unapologetic metaphor time from Mason.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, no, I think that
you're dependable, right? You don't break down. You're a BMW. Okay.
Exactly. Okay.
You're not like a VW where the wipers always go down or you have to go redo it. Anyways,
yeah. You can count on me. I'm not like other guys. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Now, you did mention that I did say I want to go back and unpack some of the things you said. Yeah. Why do you think it was that your build of 4-color Yorion was the most popular build of Yorion? What was your secret sauce for getting that adoption or popularity, at least within the US?
Yeah, I think it's a couple things. One, I think I was willing to make like small changes and take some risks in spots. So like, I think for example, one memory that stands out to me is I was talking to Abe Stein, we talked about in this episode, and I was specifically talking about like, am I going to play like one Veil or like one Night of Autumn or like one Flusterstorm? Which of these going to do? And Abe's just like, well, it's a one of in your 80 card deck and it's in your sideboard, so it's just not going to come up. And I go, I think it matters a lot because I think I need to prepare for what I'm going to expect people to do, and my deck can answer anything. I just need to make sure I'm picking the right battles and have the right tools for the problem. And, it was something later on where he was like, to him, that moment stood out. Like, to me, it stands out as a moment of like, oh, like these things do matter, and like getting kind of like called out and having to rationalize it. And from him was a moment of like, oh, maybe these things matter more than I'm thinking they are, in the situation where traditional wisdom would say Mason's deck is more diluted than normal. So I think there's a little bit of like adjusting and tuning that happened. I also think there's some amount of like, I listened to other people and took what I liked about their ideas and took a much more practical approach. I think one thing that people forget, and that people kind of forgot early into like the vaccine era of Magic, was that like Magic Online and Magic and Paper are totally different games. Like, Magic Online is a like living card game where everyone has all the cards and metagames can adapt and move, and Magic and Paper is not that by a mile. And people are slow to adapt, they are slow to move, and it is expensive, and I do not blame them. And so like, I remember going into the Vegas, that was like the GP, but not really a GP, that I'll end up getting ninth in. And Will Kruger was like, I don't know, man, Canister says you should play Dovin's Veto in your main deck. He's really smart. There's going to be like, a good amount of Belcher there. I think you'd do it, but like, trust yourself, you're smart, whatever. And I was like, yeah, I understand where Canister's coming from, but I just don't think people are going to fly to the first Magic GP and play a bunch of Belcher, nor do I think Belcher is actually that good outside of this matchup. So if someone wants to like beat me and win the tournament, like beat me and lose in the tournament, that's fine. Like, I'm okay with that.
So in the context of that paper tournament at that point in time, Belcher was kind of a boogeyman, or was going to be overrated in terms of representation. That was your thought.
Because online it was doing really well, because four color, this was like right when four color was just starting to pick up, and so people were like, I know how to beat this, I'll play Belcher. Which is true. Belcher just beats the tar out of four color.
Yeah, especially because I know like online is so optimized, and every prelim, every challenge is literally like a giant LGS event every week. It just adapts,
Yeah, and it's like, like it's almost like, what is Magic if everyone could just spend $50 a month and have all the cards, right? It's like a totally different game. And I put like, at the time it was like not normal to have like, or at least it hadn't been like traditional wisdom by everyone to put like Counterspell in the main deck. And it wasn't traditional wisdom to do like things like play Icefang Coatls and like four ofs. And there was something else that was a little bit weird for the time. But, I did some things that were a little odd, and like really trusted that like in paper there's gonna be a lot more creature decks and people are gonna play normal decks, and there's not gonna be a ton of these other decks, nor do I think I can win those matchups by doing these other things, Like I can just Counterspell, Eternal Witness, Ephemerate Lock a lot of people out of the game and I'll win. And so I think a lot of it was things like that. And I think a lot of it too was listening to what the other people were saying and learning from them, and then not practicing four color. I have like 3 leagues of Yorion 4-color total. One was before the event because Abe and Ginger bullied me into playing at least 1 league before my, GP I flew out to, essentially, which I guess was worth it. And then I played another one with Jesse and another one on stream, I think. And that was like it during the Yorion days. And when I would practice, I would play every other deck. I would be like, all right, let me play Rhinos, let me play Living It, let me play Jun Saga, let me play Murktide, let me play this deck, let me play that deck, let me brew this deck, let me see does this deck actually beat 4-color. And then I would use that information to build my deck. So I think between like not staying, I would say listening to what other 4-color players were saying and taking their things and refining
taking the feedback or taking different points of view, it sounds like.
Yeah, like I remember Andrew Ellenbogen, like a big one for me was like, he said Dress Down is probably good in the main deck, or something along those lines, right? Like that's a reasonable main deckable card. I think he had 1, and I was like, I really like where his head is at on that. Going into DreamHack Dallas, I think, Amulet in the Mirror is going to be a little bit more popular than it has been. I think people are going to really care for this tournament. They'd be willing to spend more money. I'm going to main deck these Dress Downs as like, I think a 2 of at the time. And I was like, it's also a good Urza Saga hate card, and it's just a cantrip in my 80 card deck. Worst comes to worst, I draw a card. And so I did that, and that was huge. Like, it was very important throughout that whole tournament that I, like, had these Dress Downs in my main deck, and I won a lot of rounds and beat a lot of Amulet players because they slammed Cultivator Colossus, which players were playing a lot of, to, like, beat me, and I had main deck Dress Down. And, I got a little lucky to have it. Yeah, they're just like, really? And I'm like,
nice card.
Yeah, I think it's kind of good, And so it was just, like, those kind of stuff, but, like, constantly tuning and constantly just being on top of those sort of things, and really having, between that, I would say that was a big part of it. And then the skill we talked earlier about macro, big picture thinking what matters in the matchup, and how do I play my games, I think that is my best skill as a Magic player. And I think 4-color, because it just had like answer density, like it had more answers than decks had threats, and if you knew how to line them up, you would win. I think it really just honed in a moment of like my best skill on top of everything with the best deck, and it just like really rewarded me in the that time. So I think that was kind of the mixture, and then like because it was so good, players were picking it up and they crushed.
Either back then or even now, like, what do you think is the most misunderstood thing about the modern format? Like, what are the secret insights? I'm going to ask you to spill the beans. Like, what are the insights that you think you uniquely have that other people may not see?
I think in general, and this goes beyond modern, a lot of people don't realize we're like in a different era of Magic in like a pretty real way. And I can typically tell when people think this way because they'll say something along the lines of like, wow, this 3/3 for 3 is great or whatever, and it's like a 3/3 with some minor upside, and it's like, yeah, it's like much better than cards from 2014, 2016 era or whatever, but like it is not standing up to cards like Fable the Mirror Breaker or something like that. And so like while it's a solid card and it is an exciting, cool card, it is not up to snuff. And just because the card is up to snuff, compared to 10 years ago, spoilers, we're living in the present. And to compare that to modern currently, I think players have caught up now on it, but I think a lot of people forget that modern used to be a format where it was uninteractive ships passing in the night, right? Like very much what Pioneer is now, and the complaints are about it, were the complaints of modern, like up until MH1, basically.
Yeah,
and
you do your solitaire, I do mine, right? Maybe there's some interaction, but it's not guaranteed.
Yeah, and like Humans was one of the best decks in the format, right? Because it had disruption for that and a fast clock. So it was kind of like solitaire as its little, kick you in the shins and run. And so, like, with that in mind, like, modern changed forever with MH2. MH2, they just, like, clearly aimed very high on trying to get interactive cards, because interactive cards had never stuck. And it turns out if you aim high and you take a lot of shots, sometimes you hit a lot. And when you hit a lot with those kind of things, you fundamentally change the format. So, well, I don't think this is exactly something that, like, I think people are catching up to it. I think for a while people didn't get it, and I think people don't understand that, like, the format is about interacting in a lot of ways and like coming with resources, and things like the One Ring actually make those even more perverse, where like the One Ring now, the entire format sort of before was balanced around the 2-for-1 nature of the evoke elementals, and the One Ring invalidates that disadvantage and gives you infinite resources. So that is all to say, I think that's the thing. That is at least what jumps out to me, is that, and players just underappreciating like how much interaction there is in modern these days. That is like,
and what's on rate and what's actually in the present.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe I can make my question more general, which is when you're analyzing or you're getting into a format at a point in time, what are things that you look for? Like, what are things you look for to get an edge?
That's a great question. So I guess I can use like standard as an example, because I think having some sort of framework will help listeners.
Sure, we're going to standard season, so yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So like the first thing I kind of look for is like, what is, especially like a format like standard, like what is the removal like? Because that sort of defines what the threats are like, right? So in standard, we have leyline binding, but you have to really kind of meet it in standard. We have go for the throat, we have cut down, we have get lost, and I feel like I'm forgetting one in the moment. But those I think are the main ones that they kind of have in standard. And that really sort of informs some things. When I'm looking at decks and I'm going forward in this process, I know that like my things need to be kind of good against these cards in order to succeed. So like Raffine is a card that like with the Ward 1, for example, even these cheap, efficient answers sometimes struggle to answer, right? And Raffine actually like outgrows cut down pretty quickly. So like that's the thing that I want to keep in mind, where maybe you might think to yourself, oh, cut down's so efficient, it's 1 mana, blah, blah, blah. Like, the fact that you can pick things in the format that outsize it really matters, I can't remember if it was off the air or during the show, but, like, I joked about having, like, a 3/3 artifact creature to dodge, cut down, and go for the throat. That's very much sort of what I'm looking for. And then, once I know the removal, I start looking for what's the most powerful thing. Like, what is just the most obvious, like, slam it and win the game, take over what's going on. So I think in standard right now, to use the example...
Like, what's my haymaker, right? What's my I win card?
Okay. Yeah, so, like, in standard, I would say Raffine and Shieldred are some of that, and there's some amount of, like, the domain ramp, like, Atraxa Sunfall package. Those are kind of the things that jump out to me. It's unclear at the time of this recording what is actually the best. There hasn't been a lot of pressure on it, but those are the things that jump to me, and I look for kind of like, okay, these are some of like the pillars of the format. I know what the removal is. Now that I kind of have this information, I can start thinking about why would someone play this Soldiers deck? Because the Soldiers deck doesn't do any of those things. So why are we doing this? Right? And, like one thing that I learned a long time ago in Magic that really helped me was Brad Nelson on a Kaladesh preview stream was talking about these vehicle cards that we'd never seen before. And he's like, listen, I can spend all day telling you why these cards might be bad. And I can poke holes in any argument you want. But to be like really good at Magic, you need to figure out what could make these cards good and what is good about them. Because that's what separates the good from the great. And I really took that to heart. And so to me, it's like, okay, to use the same example of the Soldiers deck, it's like, all right, goes on the ground low and goes wide, generates lots of bodies for one card. So these like Esper decks that are like 1-for-1 a bunch, then they get kind of got. And then it has cards like Make Disappear and other things that can punish these Wrath decks. And, they're also very low to the ground. So if you spend the first couple turns not doing much playing Triomes, I'm going to run you over. You play your one big spell, boom, Make Disappear, you're dead, And those kind of things can inform, be like, okay, so that's the strength of this deck. It's kind of preying on those things. Is it good enough? Does that make it the one of the best decks and make it a tier 1 deck? That I don't know. But I know a little bit about what's going on there, and that can be like an important part of the puzzle to me. Because you might see something like this other deck, let's talk about theoretical Gruul deck that doesn't exist, right? You might be like, dang, theoretical Gruul deck looks really good. It's a little weak to some of the kill spells. It's a little weak to the Wraths, but like, why isn't theoretical Gruul deck a bigger part of the format? And then you remember, listen, Esper and Domain are two of the best decks, and they make up 25-30% of the metagame, but the rest of the metagame exists too, and that deck's actually just really bad against the Soldiers play pattern, and the Mono Red play pattern, and the Dimir Schooner play pattern, and all those sort of things. So I think you really need to take a holistic view of kind of like how cards line up and how they interact, and it's really easy, and you see players do it all the time. They build some deck that beats the best deck, and they've done it. They've crafted their perfect bullet that can KO me as like the Amalia deck.
This is the foil, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then it's like, guess what? You've got to. It's like the Belcher thing from earlier, right? If you pair into me, you win, but you got to pair into me. And I'm only going to be 15% of the room, and you got to consistently do it because it's also Magic. Your deck might.
What about
stumble.
the rest? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, have fun beating Murktide. Have fun beating Soldiers or whatever. Good luck.
Yes.
So
I'm thinking about the is it the MC where Oko was just running amok and some people play blue-white control or like some ways to blank that strategy. So there's always this kind of interesting heuristic of like, when do you just play the best deck versus when are you playing a deck that potentially beats the best deck a significant amount of the time and also has game against the other, I don't want to say outliers, but I think in that event, like Oko was just so dominant that like if it wasn't one of the top 2 or 3 decks, it was basically a rogue deck, right?
Yeah, such a narrow metagame. It's a really hard question to ask.
Yeah. So it sounds like if I can use a terrible generalization of what you just told me.
Oh, I'd love that. Let's do it.
Terrible generalization time by a Spike Tryhard, James. There seems to be like 4 things on your checklist. One is like everything is contextual, right? Because it's like you're not just trying to beat the best deck, or maybe you are the best deck, you're trying to beat the best deck, but what's the other 25-30% of the metagame? Why doesn't that Gruul deck exist in a vacuum, right? So contextual. You mentioned things about like blanking value, like because you're talking about removal, so it's like, what are things I can do to invalidate or outvalue the game plan that or the macro that my opponent has, right? Another one is just like on the checklist, I would call this number 3, is just like do the powerful thing. Like just find the powerful thing and how you get there. Because sometimes I think Magic oftentimes is just like do the powerful thing, but in relation to blanking what they're trying to do to you, in relation to context. And I might dare add the 4th thing on the checklist, which is like just be consistent, because you can't just do the powerful thing but never do it like every game or every match. So it's like you got to hit all 4 of these things. Is my terrible generalization of what you tried to say. I think.
I like it. I think that's a good way of taking a bunch of Masonisms and concealing it down into a TikTok. I think you did a good job there. We have pure concentrated
I don't know.
Mason.
I've never played in a PT, so I have no idea. I'm just kind of talking out of my butt. So
that's fair.
Yeah.
I wish I had
Yeah.
deferred one of my PT invites. So here we are. We're all doing it together.
That's right. Was there some sort of
Yeah.
conflict of interest in like working on MH and then
No,
playing a PT? Was that what it was, or?
no. So I worked on MH3. And then I played Pro Tour All B1, which my time on MH3 ended the week of the Pro Tour. I guess technically the Friday before, and then I flew out to Philadelphia to play the Pro Tour. I just say I wish I had deferred because it had never even occurred to me to defer until literally I'm on the plane to get there, where it was just like I had accepted the job to be a contractor and go to Seattle and work on MH3 for 2 months before even the RC. And Dan Musser, who is the manager of play design and worked on the MH3 team, was the one who talked to me and said, like, you've got the job if you want it. And I was like, obviously I'll take it, And so, anyways, he was the one who was like, don't worry, it's not a conflict of interest. If you end up qualifying at the RC, since this is a modern set, you will not be unable to play the tournament. If you work on a standard legal set, you can't play Pro Tours, I believe, for like the year which they come out or something like that. There's some weird stipulation that I never really learned because I didn't work on a standard set. But then I ended up qualifying, which was woohoo, great. And then I realized like, oh dang, I'm going to be focusing on modern. And it just never occurred to me to ask for the deferral to the next PT so I could actually really try and stuff. And this was my second PT too. So like some part of me likes to believe that first PT Mason would have figured out to defer. But I was just so hyped to like work on Magic and get to do the thing that I love and want to do as a full-time career. And so I was just so focused in on modern and trying, to make sure I don't release Ragavan 2 or whatever, and just doing my hard work. And so I sometimes joke that, people better appreciate Modern Horizons 3 because I spewed a PT on it. But it was still like a really fun, great experience, all things considered. But yeah.
Are you allowed to talk about what your experience is like working for Wizards?
I can to some degree, and then when
if you obfuscate the details.
Yeah, I mean, like I had a lot of fun. I am someone who wants to do game design as like a job, and getting to do this was sort of a dream come true in a lot of ways. Where it's like, no matter what, I get to work on Magic, which is this huge part of my life. You can see from Emrakul behind me if you're watching the video. It's this like big part of my life. I've met a lot of my friends, a lot of my loved ones via this game. And no matter what happens, at the end of the day, James, I got to work on Magic. And hopefully I made it a better game. And I hopefully helped, make someone have a better play experience, by playing some awful games of Magic or whatever, and, getting a card changed or something like that. Hopefully they don't even notice that I worked on something like that, And that opens the door for me to like, I have some experience in the industry now, and so now it's like if other opportunities arise, it's like, hey, I worked with Wizards of the Coast, which specifically for card game type stuff is like going to Harvard. It's like, hey, I went to Yale, we were Harvard. Entry level job. Let's have a conversation. Get me past this intro stage. So that part of it was all really cool, and getting to tackle some of these problems and think about Magic in this way was so unique and so awesome. Getting to design cards was so unique and so awesome. And getting just to like fidget with them and try to think about like what are the goals with this card and how will this make players happy or unhappy is something that was really cool. And all in all, it was just a really great experience, and it's something that like I cannot wait to talk in more clear picture detail about. But overall, the experience was great, and I will say this: the thing that I think frustrates me the most, especially after having like done it, and this is a weird thing too that sometimes like gets brought up to me, so I'm going to use your platform a second to get the message out. I didn't do what like Aspiring Spike and like Canister did, and they did like a file pass a couple times. So like
I think they were asked to consult and give feedback on certain cards, like Lord of the Rings cards,
so
right?
My understanding is they were given like a set list basically, and they were like, "Hey, what are your thoughts on this? Blah blah blah. Feedback, iterate, feedback, iterate, feedback, iterate." I did a similar-ish thing, except I was in the building and I was playing with like proxy cards and like doing like they do in FFL at the actual place. And like I was in the old, now no longer building of Wizards of the Coast, like on floor 2, playing games all day and like
so
having
it was
whiteboard
actual
meetings.
More playtesting or running through real scenarios.
Yeah, I was like, updating decks and building new decks and like, solving problems and like having whiteboard meetings of like, we think X card's too strong, we're too weak, or we need a card for this type of thing, Admittedly, the latter happened a lot less than the other two, but a lot of it was like, okay, Mason, BBD, Brad, we need you all to like go tackle these problems and come back and talk to us, and then we need to present solutions to the problem. I'm a big believer in like actionable feedback, and that's like a big thing they seem to like there of like, all right, you've told us what the problem is, but do you have a solution?
Sure, yeah. Don't just come with problems, come with solutions as well.
Exactly, yeah. So that's something where like that's what my job was, and I was just there, and I lived in a Marriott hotel that was like 500 feet away, and I walked to my hotel room and back to the office, and like that was sort of what I did. And I hung out with friends outside of work, but like that
just
was my life
immersion
for 2
in
months.
Magic. It sounds like.
Oh yeah, it was full immersion, and it was sick. I mean, it really was like a dream come true. Earlier today, we recorded our end of the year constructive criticism podcast ahead of the holidays, and I was talking about how like it's crazy to think about my year in Magic because it's been such a whirlwind, and it started with like a dream come true in like 9 different ways, and some of them I can't even talk about yet. And it was just an amazing sort of moment and like time to live in. And I loved like every second of it. And I loved working in the building. I loved working with these people who care a lot and they want you to have a fun time. That's what I was going to say about like from the inside, the frustration is like people act like they don't care, they don't listen. They do, but like it is a really hard job. And a lot of times I see a lot of people who seem to know all the answers. And when I ask them questions that are a little bit harder, not always, but a lot of them don't have very good answers. And I'm not saying the people in the building have the perfect answers, but I'll tell you they try a lot. And that, if you had to answer and serve all the like masters that they do and all the same goals, I don't know if you would have better solutions. And I don't know if you could figure all this stuff out out the knowledge that we have. Everyone says like, oh, it's so obvious that this card would be broken. And it's like, I mean, maybe it's not. Or like maybe something could change last minute and some people didn't see it and it got through the door. Like it's a physical game. It's not like Snap or Hearthstone or whatever where you can just change something, Like Marvel Snap updates their game like every other week. Like that is just not what Magic gets to do. And it just totally is a different beast. So they care a lot and they are trying really, really hard to make it a game that you love. Like I think I just saw today or yesterday like an interview of Melissa's coming out that you did with her soon, and like
Melissa DeTora, yes. I've had certainly my share of WotC staff on this podcast, and even though I've never worked at Wizards, I can tell you for a fact, I can back you up. Like every time we talk about game design with WotC staff, it just makes me realize how impossibly challenging it is. You're designing things for so many different constituents. Sometimes you're doing things with such a massive amount of team cooperation with timelines, deadlines, and something gets passed over in a file. Like nothing's ever malicious, but it's just like there are a lot of moving parts. And if you think you can do it better, you would be totally, utterly wrong. This is from hours and hours of conversation with different members of WotC staff, including Melissa, Carmen, and others. I think I know this for a fact now because I've done so much behind the scenes work with conversations with these folks.
Yeah,
these extremely strong people. But it's it's a team effort, and when you have a team, like it's challenging.
It's really hard. It's also really hard to be like, no, you other 9x people are wrong. Like this is the thing. Like there was one thing that I was like on week 2, I was like, hey, I think this card's a problem. Here are my reasons. And everyone.
Sorry, I'll just interject one other thing. Like, it's not even just Magic game design. I've talked about game design with like Patrick Sullivan and other people about like. Yeah, sorry to interrupt you, but I'm just gonna say it's really hard. It's not just Magic, just game design in general. So
no, yeah, it is. I was just gonna say that like sometimes you might even have the right idea, but like it doesn't look that way. Or whatever, and sometimes it just takes you having to like see it in different contexts or have it explained in a different way. Like sometimes it just doesn't click, or like you don't see the full ramifications. And I had an example of that where like on week 2 I saw this card that was this problem, and I kind of foresaw it being like really bad, and then not everyone really believed me, which was fine. And so I just played some more with people and kind of showed them, and then a couple weeks later kind of like brought up again. I was like, hey, here's these problems for these reasons. Once again, in addition, these things, I believe these things to be true. We ended up making a change to try and prevent that, and I don't know if I got it right or wrong, right? I think I was right. I think I helped avoid a problem. Maybe I accidentally created a new one that I won't even realize, or we didn't realize until all the cards come out, or something in the far future because of what I did happens, right? But you just act in the best faith that you can, that you are presenting the best game possible. And sometimes things fall through the cracks because of that. So,
yeah, absolutely. It's just so hard. And I think your example is a really good one, because really at the end of the day, you have to be happy. This is any job, not just design, but it's like, if you speak your truth and you give the inputs to the higher ups or your colleagues, at the end of the day, you have to just be happy with that, because it's not going to 100% be taken. But like, okay, this is me, Mason. I've done the work. This is where I think the problems are. This is documented. That's, at the end of the day, that's all you can do. And it's like, you're putting your argument forward, your position forward, having your point of view, because that's what they hire you for, in good faith. And that's really all you can do. That's literally all you can do. And I think you have to just be able to live with that. Like, it's the thing that people may not understand is that, I mean, because we're playing a game, like, life is not like this adversarial thing where you're trying to like win your argument over somebody else, especially when you're a magic designer. Like, you're just trying to like work with other people in good faith to make this thing as good as possible. But there's death of a thousand cuts. There's always opportunities for somebody to get it wrong, like, 6 months later. And it's just like, it's not malicious at all, but you just have to do the best you can, like, given your point of view, right?
Yep, 100%.
Yeah. Wow, I've been rambling a lot this episode.
No worries. You're good.
Yeah. I want to actually like just change the topic a bit. People have asked you about coaching because you're a magic coach. But I want to turn the tables. I want to ask you, if I'm a magic player, how do I know when I should seek coaching? Think about all the things we talked about in the past, about in this interview, about like foundational and like doing some work and getting like cyborg guy. It's like, is there a particular point in time where it makes sense for a magic player to seek one-on-one coaching?
Yeah, I think everyone's different and everyone learns in different ways. And some people, it would be more helpful sooner, and some people more helpful later, right? My guess, an answer to like the aggregate is, if you feel like you have been trying and sort of stagnating and you can't figure out the why on stuff, and there's maybe things that are confusing, or there's something where you want to understand some element to the game and you can't find a resource on it, all of these things are good reasons to get coaching. I have some people who, get a lot of coaching, and I see them like, bi-weekly or once a month or every other week, or sorry, every week, excuse me. And there's some people who I see like once every 2 or 3 months, and they come in and they have their Google Doc with like 10 questions, and they're like, all right, Mason, let's go, and like we work through those questions, and they'll schedule a session if something comes up that's like they think is super important, but otherwise they wait a little bit, they go out and they work on it, and they come back, And my answer to the question really is like, if you feel like you're struggling and you can't come up with why, and you feel like you need a little bit of help, that's a good reason to get a coach, to get someone who can help you with solving the problems that you think you have, right? And not like, no coach is a one-size-fit-all situation, but it is something where like, let's say you're like struggling with fundamentals, that I might be someone you want to reach out to. If you've been playing Amulet Titan for a long time and you're struggling there, you might want to reach out to like Dom Harvey, right? There's a lot of differing things you could do there, but I think that a very similar way to a sideboard guide, if you feel like you're struggling and you don't understand the why and the concepts, that's a good time.
Okay. I'm trying to think about my own situation, right? Because I've been grinding Magic in different formats for a while. I played a little bit of Modern. Actually, it's funny, I didn't play Modern until MH2, so I never knew the 2 ships passing into Night Modern. I just started playing more recently, and I've been playing Legacy for a very long time. I think let's use myself as an example.
Yeah.
Like, I think I'm good enough to like just like win FNMs or the occasional challenge or the occasional like 5-0 in a league, whatever, it's a league, right? But I'm good enough for that. Like, I'm at that level where I know the fundamentals. I think I know the fundamentals. I think I know how Magic works at a certain competency. Like, but I'm feeling like I am not like top 80ing RCQs. I'm not like going above that level. So is it the right time for me to seek coaching? And if so, like, what are some of the things that I should be seeking? Like, it's not just like, oh, I'm going to hire Mason as a coach, but like, what are the kinds of the things that I should come to the table with in terms of a list of questions or otherwise?
Well, the first thing I always kind of ask people when they're sort of in this spot, or because I had this kind of conversation at like events a lot, and when I ask you, James, and maybe something to think about, maybe you can answer on the show if you want to, is what are your goals with Magic? If your goal is you want to play the RC, right, and you want to maybe play a Pro Tour, or you just want to generally improve in some way and you want to get better, might be a great time to get a coach. If your goal is like, yeah, I want to be the best Merfolk player there's ever been, maybe a coach would be helpful, but maybe you should go out and work on that some stuff in that regard more and come back later. Mm-hmm. Right? So I think it matters a lot on kind of like what your goals are, because first off, there's no wrong goal. That's my favorite part of Magic, is you, me, and Dupree can all interact in totally different ways with Magic, and we all get a great experience out of it. And there's no wrong goal. The only wrong goal is lying to yourself about what your goal is.
Yeah.
So look internally and figure out what you want that to be.
Let's role play. I'll just tell you my answer, because it's my actual answer, and this might be useful for somebody listening. Like, it's the first. Like, I'm trying to like make the RC or make the PT at some point, and I feel like when I am in these like RC queues, I can beat, like, because of a certain competency I have with like the way I grind, or maybe I already like bought the Cyborg Guide for the deck I'm playing. I've already like watched streams of popular people, so I kind of know how people think about lines and how they go through the process with the deck. I feel like I have a pretty optimized build, and I know why I'm sideboarding cards, how I'm approaching matchups. But it's like I still have this feeling like when I'm playing that RCQ, there's just like 5 or 6 people that always seem to outplay me, and I don't know why. Like, I feel like they've always got my number. They're always the ones top 8ing, and I'm always the one that's out of the top 8, because whenever I run into them, it just feels like I get run over, and I don't exactly know why I'm getting run over. I'm kind of in that situation.
Sure. I mean, it's hard for me to know, James, without like seeing your games and stuff like that. My guess, as just sort of from doing this a lot, is that they might have a better understanding of how the matchup's played, and you might have a solid understanding of what's going on in these games, but not a great understanding. You might also be sort of lacking in macro game planning and sort of having a hard time of like thinking about how the game ends. This is very funny, but like an anime I watched a long time ago was a card game anime, and they talked about something called a winning image, which I really took to heart, which was like imagining how the game is going to win helps you make your plays, whatever. And for them, it was like the heart of the cards, whatever. But I do think there's something to that about like...
That's like an anime convention that's actually true. Like they actually imagine like what happens at the end of the fight or whatever. And
yeah, exactly.
You should go,
And I've heard there's something about that with boxing too, but someone who told me that would like definitely sound like they heard it from a thing, heard it from a YouTube video. And so one day I want to go research like boxing, stuff. But like, I don't know, take that with a grain of salt in the boxing thing. But regardless, like that could be what's going on. It might also be deck selection. You might be struggling in sideboarding. Like you might have the sideboard guy, but you might not understand like, once again, along the same way of like bigger picture, the planning. You might be doing small micro errors. You might be like playing kind of sloppy. All these things could be the thing. And like very typically, like, like to fully role play here, like it's you're asking me like how the sessions go. Like the first one, we're probably going to spend the first 10-ish minutes me trying to like get an idea of where you're at with a few things. Then we'll spend the next 50 minutes or so sort of talking about something and working on a skill. And then typically the second or third session, depending on kind of how things go in the first one, I will want to watch some gameplay and talk with you through some games. Like Magic Online, if you don't know, this is a great tool for players out there. It records all the games you play on the computer you're watching from. So I think technically it's like 150, but like that's a lot of games. And so you can go back and you can watch your games and you can click through each individual action. And so I like very, very rarely play games with the people I am coaching. Like we're almost never in the leagues.
It's not real time. You're analyzing on the second session the replays, mind you.
Exactly. Yeah. And sometimes we'll have like a lot of replay sessions. Sometimes we won't. Depends on the person. But what I love about the replays is I like tell them like, hey, you're gonna be like in this situation. If you and I are about to do it, I'd be like, James, you're gonna be really tempted to tell me what past James did. Don't worry, I'll see it on the replay. Let's talk about this right now as if we're watching the streamer, James, and what we think we would be doing, and tell me your thought process, and let's work
almost
through
like
this together.
A third party, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and like ideally, I try to, luckily with like the week or 2 weeks between sessions, they sometimes forget what the thing was, so they like don't have the answer. Ideally, some people finish their homework right before the session, which is life imitates school or whatever. But regardless, we go through that, and we talk about it, and that's what I care about. Because remember we talked about earlier, I don't care about winning or losing. That's useless. Who cares? Like, if you want to like actually win more games of Magic, having a better understanding and a better thought process and better decision making skills, that's the stuff that's going to lead to actually winning. So let's have a conversation and figure out what play we should be making and why. And like, I have like some lessons that I like have with people where, you know, I'm like working on upgrading these things too, but like having like scenarios built. We're like talking about I call it telling a story. Everyone else calls it hand reading. And there's a reason why I could get into about why I call it that, and other people call it a different thing. End of the day, it's a hand reading lesson. And sometimes we'll like talk about that and we'll work on it and be like, okay, you know, our opponent led on this pain land on turn 1, right?
Oh, as in what could they have and what are you trying to play around?
Yeah, and like if they kept a 7-card hand and they go pain land, like in let's say Pioneer, well, their hand's probably pretty strong if they kept like double pain land. That's like a pretty painful start to the game. And so it might be like, okay, what kind of hand would tempt you to do that if we didn't see anything on turn 1, right? Inversely too, right? Let's say, you know, last turn on turn 2, we decided to make a play where we played into Fatal Push, right? It's like, hey, they have Fatal Push, they're definitely going to do this. We need to take a risk. We're going to slam X card. Amalia, let's say. You know? They don't Fatal Push, they pass the turn. They play Blackleaf Cliffs after going pain land, Blackleaf Cliffs. What do you think they drew? I'll give you a hint. It's probably Blackleaf Cliffs. So, you know, like they wouldn't just play a pain land beforehand, especially, you know, this land, there's taps pretty soon. So in this next turn, if I'm thinking, right, I'm looking at my hand and I'm like, oh God, I lose to Fatal Push this turn. Think to yourself, wait, almost assuredly don't have it. They would have done it before. They drew the Blackleaf Cliffs. I paid attention to their lands. Play this, go. You know? And there's like degrees to that too, right? Like if your opponent goes turn 1 Blackleaf Cliffs in like Pioneer, and then they go turn 2 Hive the Eye Tyrant. If they had Hive on turn 1, they would have played Hive almost assuredly. There's like no real red cards that you play for 1 mana these decks play, and Hive will enter tapped sooner than Blackleaf Cliffs will. So like you can assume your opponent is competent and smart and able to figure out these very obvious things, which I think is a fair assumption, and I try to always assume my opponents are, you know, at my level, if not higher. And it's like, okay, well, I know that, you know, my turn 1 play that would assuredly, let's say Llanowar Elf is going to get Fatal Pushed. I now know that this turn 2 play is probably pretty safe, barring their next draw step, you know, if they didn't Fatal Push the first one. So, and there's some amount of like patience and like maybe they value things differently, right? It's not like this perfect, like, with these tricks, you're going to see through your opponent's hand and know all. But it's like you can come to pretty reasonable conclusions, and there's a lot of things like that. So, we work on things like those kind of lesson plans. That's like an example. And then like we'll work on something, and then we'll like replay a game, and we'll like look at the replay and talk about working that skill. So like a thing that a lot of players struggle with is like big picture planning and thinking about how the games are going to go, and kind of working also through the turns at hand. So like thinking a turn ahead is pretty easy for people. Once they get it, they sort of get it. But like my turn, rough outline of your turn, sketch of my next turn is what I call it, where it's like you have a loose idea. That actually really confuses a lot of people, is what I found. Is they're really good at figuring out what the opponent's going to do, but if I tell them like, okay, that happens, what's your next turn going to look like, they're like, draw step.
It's like a flowchart. You're constantly recalculating, right? It's like what's your chess move like 3 turns from now, kind of thing.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. So we work on those kind of things.
Okay, if I take what you said to the very extreme, in a very extreme way, does it stand to reason that this is kind of outside coaching, but does it stand to reason that the moment that I know how to play around my opponents and I can rationalize or explain every move I make, is that the moment where I just become a masterful Magic player? Is when I can do that. I can literally explain every single step I take, and I can also articulate like everything I'm trying to play around, because I assume my opponent is playing optimally and game theory and is signaling certain things.
Yeah, and assuming that your like thoughts are also sound, right? Because you might have plans for everything, and I'm like, bro, like why would they do that?
That's not a plan.
Yeah, it's like yeah. So I stomped myself.
My plan is to
way.
hope that they're not going to draw anything for the next 5 turns. Just kidding.
Yeah, no, I mean, like sometimes, man, I've been in tournament spots where it's like land for 5 turns is the game plan. It's not a good one, but it's the plan I got. No, but like jokes aside, like assuming, you know, that you are like rational and like these things are good sound logic or whatever. One, it's hard to have like the perfect optimal play in every sort of spot, or whatever, because there are so many variables. But assuming like within good faith here, I think that's like kind of the first step in like really becoming like a masterful, great player. And I think there are other things like deck selection and technical play and ability to sideboard, and that's like just one step of it. And I think some people really excel at like that, and then they sometimes are like pretty good at other things. But like if you excel in one of these areas and you're pretty good, you can get really far in Magic just doing that, you know. And you could easily make the RC, for example, if you like excelled at that and just, you know, had those kind of moments. Like one thing that really I never really coached Jessie Robkin, but she definitely was kind of like the protogenetist, and she jokes that she's my number one pupil, so I'm gonna, you know, say I coached her or whatever. But okay. I would play with her, and she was very smart, but she would just like walk head first into things and not like think about what the opponent could be doing or why. And it was never this bad. But the example I sometimes give is like the opponent was playing like a mono black deck that clearly plays Orcish Bowmaster, and she would be surprised when they flashed in Bowmaster. She'd be like, what? And it was never actually that bad, but it was that kind of level. Example. Yeah, sure. That's the dramatized version of it. And it was like, Jessie, you're really smart. Think about what your opponent is doing. Like, they probably have a plan, you know? And, you know, now she's like, that's one of the things where, like, I think it really helped Jessie take the step up from, like, strong Magic player, had, like, energy, top 8, etc., to becoming, like, that phenom, and, like, doing everything was, like, things like that. And just, like, that one little push really helped her. And then that push cascaded into all these other things. Then she opened up all these new connections and met all these people and learned all these things, you know, and like, it's a lot of great work from her. But like one of the things I know that really helped her was stopping and slowing down and thinking about what makes sense for my opponent to have here, you know, and like not being surprised. And I remember us talking about how, I can't remember exactly what it was, but I want to say it's like one of the first NRG she top aided after we became friends. And it was like, she told me like, I wasn't surprised all day. Like no one ever did a thing that was like a stock normal deck that I was never surprised because I thought about it.
I expected this as a possibility.
Exactly. Sort of. And like maybe I played into it, you know, like I expected them to have collected company or whatever, you know, and they had it, and I was going to lose to it if it hit the perfect 2, but I also knew I couldn't win with the other cards. So I made I said call, have Coco, and hit the right cards, and they did, and I lost, and it sucks, so I'm going home, you know? But like those sort of things are, I think, what matter a lot in like making or breaking people is that kind of stuff, and like having a good plan and thinking through your turn and executing, etc. So what you described, I do think is like an Infinity Stone gauntlet of like the first little, you know, that's the time stone, but there are a lot of things I think really get there, and it can be really hard. And a lot of people will play Magic for a very long time, I think, and never master a majority of those. You know, I don't think I've mastered most of these things by any means, but I'm working on it and I want to get there. So
I'm not sure if anyone's ever asked you this, but of the students that you, or pupils that you've coached, if some of them have not successfully leveled up from your counsel, why do you think that is? And this is not because you're a bad coach. I'm not trying to imply that. But are there certain things about limiting factors about players that prevent them from actually reaching their own personal next level?
That's a great question. I would say I typically am of the belief that most people, if they try their hardest and dedicate time and energy and are willing to stick to it, because Magic is a marathon, not a race. No one tournament defines you. I believe basically the super majority can get to the Pro Tour. They might not be able to consistently get there. They might be, you know, they're definitely punching above their weight class to get there, but I believe people can do it. I think the things that get in people's way are a few things. One is ego. 2 is self-image, which is a little different. Like they see themselves as X player. Like, oh, I'm a control player, so I only play control. Or like, oh,
you mean over labeling of the self kind of thing?
Yeah, exactly. Like, well, they aren't willing to do other things, and they don't branch out because they've identified themselves as this, and they're not willing to like put down what's fun or how they view themselves in order to reach their other goal of make the Pro Tour, right? So, for an example, like I hate playing cantrips. I cannot stand casting Brainstorm and Ponder. And
come on, you play Dress Down. Just kidding.
Yeah, well, someone made that joke before, and it's like, it's great. You know what Dress Down says? Draw a card. I don't have to think. I love draw a card. But when I have to like fiddle these fiddly ones, I just get so bored.
Which are the top 3, or which ones to
like
put back?
Pondering is like, I gotta look at these 3 cards and min-max everything, and this is so much fun, and my opponent gets to sit there for 30 seconds. Like, That is not super fun for me. I love that some other people love that. That is great. Not very fun to me. When I play Legacy, I play the Ponder decks because when I'm playing Legacy, it's almost always a team event, and I don't want to let my friends down. And I don't play Elves, which is my favorite deck in Legacy by a mile. I've got my Glimpse, I got my Cantrip there, but like I don't play my deck because it's not going to help. Like it isn't as good. I'm willing to put these things aside to reach my goals. So
you're trying to win. You're trying to win. You're not trying to let your self identity or ego get in the way. Hopefully.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I try to be a reasonable deck gamer and pick a reasonable, good deck at minimum. It might not be the best deck. It might be a little bit off the beaten path, but it's a reasonable deck. No one's going to give me like the stink eye when I play it. So I think those are two things. And I think sometimes, honestly, just like being too results oriented really matters for players and really holds them back, where they're like, well, I haven't done it yet. And it's like, well, you didn't really try. And they're like, well, I played all season. And it's like, how many RCQs did you play? I played 3. It's like, okay, I understand that, like, unfortunately, you're in a position where 3 is as many as you could play. I want you to know that is, like, not an unreasonable amount for you to miss on, right? Like, a lot of people play 2 in 1 weekend, And so it is simply a thing of, like, you unfortunately are in a position where, like, hypothetical person, it has, a partner and a kid and a job and only gets to play 1 weekend a month per season. Totally reasonable. I think you can do it. It just take you a little longer, and especially if you're doing these other things, they can compound on it. And we need to make sure that we are playing with Magic with our goal in mind. If our goal is just we want to work on improving, we don't really care if we make it, we want to play the decks we like while doing that, totally valid goal. But don't tell yourself that like your goal is this other thing when it's not, and like really focusing on that. I think those are the biggest.
Be honest
things.
with yourself. Like, what are your actual goals? Like, if that's what your goal is, then you got to figure out how to optimize for that goal, right? Don't BS yourself, basically.
Yeah, like my goal this last year in Magic has not been to like really push myself in a crazy way. I just haven't had time to. I've been doing too many other things. My goal was to save Modern. That was a joke. But I swear, Watson, it was a joke. Bring me back for the Marvel. Anyways, but
Mason to Savior Clark right here.
That's right. Yeah. Anything you liked about Modern Horizons 3 was all me. Everything you hate was in fact Brad Nelson. Just add it to your melee complaints, and we'll see you there. And so there's a form for you right over there. But no, jokes aside, like my goals weren't in line with that. Like our goal recently has been like I've been like taking the approach to getting healthy, as I drank my Coca-Cola earlier, to getting healthy like I did Magic early on, where like it's a priority where every day I'm going to the gym, where it's a rest day, and I'm like watching when I'm eating, and like like I just was drinking a Coke, which is not healthy, but like I'm also like being realistic with myself that like if I go cold turkey and quitting these things, it's gonna make me not get there. But I'm committed that like a year from now, if you have another interview with Mason, it's the Chad meme Mason, and I'm going to get there. Okay. And maybe it's like a year and a half, maybe it's 2 years, maybe I slip up a little bit, maybe something happens, but I know what my goal is I want to be healthier. I haven't liked myself for a long time. I want to change a lot of things about myself. I know it's going to cost me more money later in life if I don't do it now. I have this opportunity. Let's take it and let's do it. And that's my goal. That's one of my big goals in life. My other goal is to like get a game design job and to like continue improving coaching and like become a better coach, so I can help more people reach their goals. My goals have not been like to go around and play all these SCGs and stuff. And like my other goals have been like improve at commentary. I do a lot of commentary for the NRG series, and I hope to do commentary for our season Pro Tour someday. So I'm trying to like work on my craft there. And like I'm also, at the beginning of the show I mentioned like there's more to Mason and like there's these other things. I make it a point that like at some point the magic stops in the day. Like I have to do more than Magic. I cannot just be someone who only plays Magic and burns out. Like, it might just be that my life for a little while is, One Piece and as I catch up, and Magic, but there's going to be something else that goes on in the day. Like it will not be, nor will ever be all Magic all the time. Even when I was working on MH3, I would try really hard. It was hard, I'll admit, but it was really hard. I tried really hard to stop and actually enjoy other things, and play League of Legends with friends, like on my computer, or talk to somebody on the phone, or watch, an anime or a movie or something, or go out and do something and go trivia night. Like I was making an effort to be more than just Magic, because I want to be a well-rounded and complete person. I don't just want to be some encyclopedic guide to Magic and design and improving. Like that would make me really sad if that was all there was to Mason. You know, if all someone could say to Mason was like, oh, Mason is like,
Hopefully that's not the only thing on your tombstone kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. I want it to be like, you know, like someone's like, what's the deal on Mason? You know, they might say like, yeah, he's smart at magic. He's a great teacher. But they might also say, dude's really funny, or dude's really compassionate, or he'll help you out in a situation, you know, where you can trust him, you know, if you're ever in a situation to get out of a party or whatever, you know, like one of the highest compliments I ever got was someone said like, oh, if I'm ever in a situation where I feel uncomfortable, I should find you, you know? And I was like, wow, that means a lot.
That means a lot, yeah.
Yeah, like that is like incredibly high praise that someone was willing to say that and felt that way. And like, I don't know, that's the kind of stuff where like, to me, there's more to life than magic. I don't know exactly how we got here, but that's where I am. That's my answer to the question.
And you know, I've talked to enough competitive Magic players on this show now where I've created this sort of generalized theory. I call it the paradox of Magic. It's like when your life is 100% about Magic or 99% about Magic, you actually don't do as well as when you try to balance your Magic life with other things. Like, I've talked to so many people that for whatever reasons, when they stepped away or took a break or didn't make it all consuming and they were not completely results oriented, strangely, that's the paradox. That's when they actually started to see some greater success, is when they weren't thinking about it or playing the game. Obviously, there are caveats to this. They probably already put in like their 10,000 hours and things like that. But I have seen that to be kind of a pattern. It's like when your life is not all about Magic, you can actually get better at Magic, strangely enough.
I agree. Like, we've seen Strosky tweet, you know, like, I'm retiring or whatever, and it became a joke, but like, also Brendan DeCandio this last weekend, right? DeCandio was kind of like, hey, I've got real life stuff going on. I got this kid. This RC is kind of my swan song.
It's the new one time, basically.
Exactly, yeah. And like, you know, like, and then DeCandio qualified for the Pro Tour and beat me on round 9. It feels like you should have scooped a homie, you know? You're quitting. Anyways, jokes aside. You know, it's a situation where it's just like,
but I'm not bitter.
I'm over it. And I have only thought about it a little since we've played, bud.
Right.
No, but it is something where it's like, I think when you have those extra pressures on yourself and like Magic becomes your full thing, it like weighs down on you. Like, you know, I haven't talked to Nathan about it, but I wonder how much like people calling him the new
Stoyer?
Nathan Stoyer, excuse me, yeah. I like,
he's just Madonna now. He only needs the first name.
Exactly. So. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Well, drop the Stoyer. Nathan's cleaner. You know, and it's just so, you know, with Nathan, right? It's like, I wonder how much like adding all this pressure that like, hey kid, you're the new GOAT, or like, what's it feel like to be in contention for greatest of all time already? Or like, what does it feel like to do these sort of things? Like,
that stuff can mess you up, really.
Yeah, exactly. And like, Nathan's great and had like good results, or whatever, since he won the Pro Tour. But like, and to be fair, it's like impossible for anyone to keep up Nathan Nathan was doing, right? But like, it is a situation where like, I wonder how much that weighs on him and how much that like takes him down. And like, that's a very overt example of us kind of like idolizing somebody and having that moment. But I think it's very similar, where it's like, yeah, if Magic is your main source of income or whatever, and things are rocky with you and your partner, and you know, like your views are going down or whatever, right? And like, you feel like you really need a big hit. Like, I assume that like makes it much harder to play, you know. And I'm very lucky and blessed that like I don't feel that way too often about my stuff.
You're diversified, I think, is your situation.
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't know. I think if you find yourself stuck in that position, like James was talking about there, of like, you know, there's so much on me and taking a step back, it's probably just because you need to prioritize other things in life. And Magic will still be here. I'm betting my whole life on Magic, you know, so I hope I'm right that, you know, Magic will still be here when you can take a break and come back, and, you know, it will still be there to compete. It might play a little differently. There might be some cool new cards, but, you know, it's going to be the same game.
Just taking the Nathan example on a much smaller scale for you. You mentioned just when you were popularizing the 4-color Yorion deck, and there were points in time where you didn't play a lot, but you had to, like, you were forced into playing a league, or you played 2 or 3 leagues. Was there pressure that you put on yourself to do well in those leagues, even though it was such a, you know, a much smaller version of like, you know, what Nathan is going through?
No, one of my best friends, Daniel Combs, I would talk to him, and he would always laugh about this, like back when PPTQs, I would play a league the night before. We might be on Discord or whatever the voice chat at the time was, and I'd 2-3 the league, and I'd be like, lock it in, and then I'd win the PPTQ the next day. You know, like, I just don't really care about that, you know. And the only time I really care about that sort of stuff is like when
Because there's
I
a lot of
want to
chest
care.
pumping. There's a lot of people who are like, yeah, I think this is the right deck. I literally 5-0 like, 10 leagues in a row, and so I'm ready to lock it in. And then you get the tweet next week, it's like, oh, I 0-2 drop, but whatever, like it was so hype leading into it. I just feel like people have these like weird expectations or unrealistic expectations.
Yeah, I saw a tweet recently that I really kind of like. That's kind of mean, but I think it gets the point across. It's like,
Okay.
I just beat 5 people I would never test with. It's time to lock in this deck for a tournament that's worth $100,000 across the country. No more testing. And it's like,
Okay.
and here's another great example. I played more from the Pioneer banning to the RC than I had all year combined when it came to like actually focus testing and playing games of Magic. I played more in that 2-week span than I had the whole year.
After the Karn ban and all that stuff. Okay.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. All that year. I guess I'd argue MH3 doesn't count, but I did focus and try really hard for that. So post MH3 to then, which was about 8 or 9 months, I played less than I had in that 2-week period. And I was playing leagues, and I played against some really great players. I went to like Lavunga and Leviathan and Mog and like a lot of great Magic Online grinders, and I had some really good games. I also had games where people lightning struck my 3/3 when I was at 2. And it was just like, this is a moment of like, leagues are noise. And what leagues are is a great way for you to get games in when there's no one else to play with and you can't focus test with your friends, or maybe don't have that experience, or you want to get reps in, right? And so I don't really care if I win or I lose. What I care about is like, how did I play? Did I make good choices? Was my logic and my reasoning good? What was going on with that sort of stuff? And like, when I look back on tournaments, it's like, if I won the tournament but played poorly, I'm not going to be like the guy that's like a bad winner and ruin the vibe for everyone else. But I will think about it a lot. And like when I'm on the treadmill or lifting weights, it will like ring in my head like, you should have played better. Why did you play so sloppy? What is going on that like you played like this? Who cares that we won this RCQ? You very easily could have lost, Like I've only played like 1 weekend of RCQs every season or whatever. Like I haven't had to grind. It's very easy to qualify, I think. If you get lucky and you're good, and I think I've hit the lucky part where I only had to play 1 weekend of these things. I won a shot, one shot, played an Apex event, and then lost their Saturday one, and then won their Sunday one. And which is even like just kind of like a bigger RCQ, right? So like, should I even judge myself for losing that? Personally, I do. Like, it's like, come on, man, you couldn't win that. Like, you're good at Modern, you know what's up. And so there is some amount of like, I hold myself to a high bar where my play is bad. But if my play is good, and I think my reasoning are good, and it all makes sense, then what more can I ask for? It's a marathon, not a race. Half the room loses round 1, and everyone but one person loses every tournament that I play. You're not special because you lost. People lose all the time. I lost round 1 of the RC, and someone like condoled me, and I was like, oh, don't worry, like 700 other people did too. It's all good. And there are people like my friend Sky, who she lost the first 3 rounds of the RC and then won 11 in a row to make the Pro Tour, including beating me. I bumped into her later in day 2 at X3. And, like, they could
That's
not
just the
lose
level of
anymore.
mental toughness that's like super strong.
Yeah, and that's like, like they are very strong. They've worked very hard, and they've continuously proved it magic. It's been great to see them push forward. And, I can't wait to see what they do at the Pro Tour. It's going to be so sick. I know they're going to take it very seriously. But, like, it is just a matter of, like, I don't care if I win or I lose. Like, when people are like, can't lose with my deck, all I do is win in leagues, and they can't tell me, like, why their deck is good, or, like, they don't have a good process or a good reasoning. It's like, that's cool that you're winning. I'm really glad. And maybe you're bad at communicating these things. Some people are not very good at communicating, and I try to keep that in mind, that, like, that's not a skill. And sometimes I had one guy in coaching once go like, man, I just feel like I can't communicate it, but I feel like I know it. And I go, man, luckily for you, your job is not to talk about Magic all day. My job is. And I can tell that you know what's going on, but you're having a hard time communicating it. But for right now, let's just focus on fixing these other things. Because I can tell that you know what's up just from the way you're kind of, the words you're trying to say. I can see it in your play.
Yeah.
But your job isn't to talk and like sound smart or whatever, right? Just because Mason sounds smart doesn't really mean anything. It's cool that you can't make a TikTok.
The goal is just for you to level up. So it's
exactly,
like,
just do better.
We'll find a way. We'll find a way.
Yeah, it's gonna be cool. Not everyone needs to be a content creator or like do these sort of things. And if you want to help your friends and teach them, that's great. They'll figure stuff out in the way to communicate in time together. Communicating with your friends is like an art. So I don't know. Who cares if you're 5 League? Who cares what won the challenge? Whatever. Magic Online's a totally different game than Magic and Paper.
Was it a process for you though to learn to deal with the negativity to yourself in a healthy way? Because I don't think a lot of Magic players are even there yet in terms of
Mm-hmm.
like positive self-talk or not getting too down on themselves when they're losing a round or two. Like, how did you develop it?
I would say growing up, my dad is a uh, psychiatrist and definitely learned a lot of things about how to like self talk and think about yourself and like who you are. And I think the anxiety we talked about earlier. I didn't talk about it too much, but a lot of the manifestation was I felt like everyone was judging me. And I felt like everyone was looking at me. Like I can clearly remember because I went to like a Church of Christ high school. I'm like in the chapel. I'm in the pew, and I remember thinking like these people are all judging me, and because I like something happened. I can't remember exactly. They're all judging me for some reason, and they're all looking at me, and I'm like getting anxious, and I can feel like the sweat starting to come. I'm having like a mini anxiety attack, and then it kind of occurs to me, I like power through whatever. It occurs to me later in life that like all these other kids are all doing the same thing, and I think a lot of people they treat others the way they think about themselves, right? And so like when someone like judges you on like because you didn't five or you didn't do well, they're probably judging themselves and they have like a bad mental talk. I think that's bad. But I think also a lot of the times to circle like not to go too far away from your question, like how do I handle it? I think I was very blessed to have a father that helped me with that sort of thing, and he also played a little bit of collegiate tennis, and then he had like a car accident, I believe, or some sort of accident where he couldn't play anymore. But he loves tennis, and one of his best friends is actually the Vanderbilt women's tennis coach, and was for a long time. It was my godfather, Jeff McDonald, and he definitely taught me some stuff where I like talked to him and things that like I wish I could remember them exactly. I just have clear memories of Jeff teaching me things and talking about winning and losing, and what matters is that we learned from this game and that we're going to move forward and we're going to improve. And like I wish I could remember his exact words, but regardless, that's the kind of stuff that taught me. And so when I play Magic, I take it like it is fun or whatever, but I'm like very serious about improving. My goal is to like be the best Mason I can be and see how high up the totem pole of being good at Magic I can be, and I compare myself only to me. I only care about being better than past Mason, and I want to look down and see how far below Mason from a year ago and 2 and 3 and 4 a month ago is, and I just want to keep climbing up. And if the difference between me now and me a month from now is like just like a little inch in the proverbial pole, that's fine. I just want to keep climbing and keep improving. And I don't care if I'm better or worse than Nathan. I don't care if I'm the best, or worst contractor on MH3. Like, who cares? Who cares about any of those kind of stuff, right? Someone asked me, is it intimidating to work with Brad and BBD? And I'd be lying if I didn't say at first it was, but then I took a step back and realized, like, why would I feel that way? They picked me. I'm smart. I can do these things, And I had a moment of self-doubt, but another with, like, all that matters is I do the best I can. I learn from the process and I move forward. And the same with Magic. Why would I care if I lost a tournament? Guess what? Everyone loses tournaments all the time. It is the most likely outcome is you're going to lose the tournament. Get used to it. Grow up. You're going to get mana screwed. Who cares? You're going to work really hard for something and fail, and caring is cool. But just don't be an a-hole to other people about it. Just like, it is cool to care about something. It is so dope to be like, it is like a dope to be like emotionally distraught and like sad that you lost at something. Just don't take it out on others. And like, it is cool to care that much about it, but also don't judge and hate yourself for it. Just be like, hey, it is cool to have tried at something and failed. You can succeed. Keep it up, and let's learn from this, and let's pick it up, and let's not give up. You haven't lost until you've given up, right? Like, maybe James failed to qualify for the RC this season, but until James actually stops trying to qualify, James hasn't failed yet, right? You're still on that track, and I feel very strongly about that sort of thing. So like I want to play more pro tours and I want to do more things, and I haven't failed until I no longer can do those anymore. So
better to have loved than lost, right? As the saying goes, right?
Exactly.
It's cool to want something, but just don't get down this overly self-destructive path.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Be chill.
All right, let's do the rapid fire round. What's the best or most memorable Magic play you ever made?
It isn't exactly a play, but it is a moment where it was just like I was playing a team event in Kentucky, and Zoe Reederman and Jesse Robkin were my teammates, and I had already qualified for the RC, but it's a destination team event, and the whole team will make it if we get. And the goal was get the team to the RC, you know. And I think Jesse had qualified, which will end up qualifying the next week on an NRG event, and Zoe, spoiler, we're gonna end up qualifying now. I can't remember exactly when Jesse gets her invite. She might like get an extra one, but anyways, we're playing. Zoe wins her awful matchup somehow, overcomes the odds, clutches it up. Heck yeah, she wins 2-0. Jesse unfortunately loses her awful matchup. It happens. I'm up a game, and I'm playing it, and it's like 4-color peak Yorion versus Esper. And it is just a moment of like, I can't remember exactly what happens, but it was just a moment of, I was like, trust me, I am not going to lose. I'm going to get you the invite. You have to just let me play, though. I've got this. Trust. I think what happened is Zoe was really anxious, and I looked at her and I said, trust me, we're going to get the invite. And one of the coolest parts about this is, so I played this like long interactive grindy game. This person has like a cool Esper build, and what I learned later is they asked the judge a question away from the table, and the judge was talking to them, and they go, I think he's cheating. And the judge goes, okay, that's a serious claim, but I'm here to listen. What's going on? What's the thing? And they go, well, he hasn't played anything in any turn since I like drew this counterspell or whatever, you know. And the reason this story is so funny is the only reason I learned this story.
How does he know I have a counterspell? He must be cheating.
Yeah, exactly. And like, I'm not playing anything. Is like, if I remember correctly, I have like a Renin 6 that's just like ticking up, and so it's like, why would I play anything? I'm going to win the game in 2 turns. And why would I ever take a chance to lose? And so it's funny because I only learned this story later because I'm talking about this match to someone the next day. Because spoilers, I end up winning, and I'll end up conceding in the finals of the 5K on Sunday in Pioneer the next day. And I'm like, I think we're like talking, like we've already shaken hands or whatever. And I'm talking about that match, and the judge goes, "Oh yeah, you know." Because I tell him, like, yeah, it was, like, very clear he had a counterspell or whatever, and, like, I just didn't play in anything, and, like, I squeezed him with the Ren 6 and 1. The judge tells me the story. So it was a really cool moment of, one, I got to, like, be the cool anime moment of, like, trust. I've got this. I'm really good at this. I'm not going to fail you, I promise. And I was doing it so well, this other dude thought I was cheating, which was sick. And it was just, like, he's not playing into my counterspell. And it's like, why do you think he would play into your counterspell? I don't know. And the judge goes, okay, I'll make sure to watch Mason and with intent. You know, and it's just like, all right. But that was I think that is the moment that jumps out to me. There are other cool play little moments, but that is the one that jumps out to me the most.
You are like my friend who used to be so good at Counter-Strike, headshotting everybody on the server, that he was banned from the server because they thought he was literally cheating because he was that good.
That's so funny. Nice.
Next question. What's the worst Magic play you ever made, and what did you learn from it?
There are a couple. The one I'm going to tell the story of is when I tell in coaching a little bit, but the long story short is, and it's been a long enough time now, I can't remember exactly. I think it was a situation where if I won this round, I was likely to be able to shake hands to top 8 the SCG, or I was going to be in a win-in situation. I can't remember exactly which. And also, it's unclear at the time.
Sure.
But I'm
pretty
playing
high stakes.
High stakes match. I'm playing Amulet Titan, and I'm playing against Affinity. And basically, it comes down to, I have a secure Tribe Scout. It's like blocking, and I have to like activate it because I'm not going to get a chance to. And I need to put in a land or something along those lines. And I have a Radiant Fountain, and I have a Ghost Quarter in my hand. And I think, there's a bunch of time on the clock. My opponent's like, don't worry, we have 30 minutes. It's going to be cool. This is game 3. And I think, and I come to the conclusion that Radiant Fountain is the best play. It dodges the most things. Ghost Quarter was good, but I think this is the 51% line. It beats basically everything, including Galv Blast, which I haven't seen any of this game. and I activate my Tribe Scout, and I put in my card, and I say gain 2 life, but I've dexterity'd in a Ghost Quarter. I put, and this is the old rules, so Ghost Quarter's on the table, and my only other card in hand is Radiant Fountain, and I've said the life. I obviously can't take it back. I've put it in, my whatever. New rules.
Bit of a mechanical error.
Yeah,
Sure.
exactly. And basically, the lesson I got from it is slow down. And I think that was one of the biggest things that helped me in Magic is, and I sometimes joke in coaching that LSV is the worst thing that ever happened to Magic because he plays so fast and he's so
Speed
good.
Magic.
Yeah, and people are like, if I'm good at Magic, I'll play fast. I'm Lightning McQueen, and they play vroom, 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 vroom. And I did that a little bit, and I really slowed down, especially a little bit before that, but that really hammered it home of like, Mason, slow down. And guess what card they drew, James? Gallop Blast.
Mm-hmm.
And I died.
Mm-hmm.
And had I not done that, I would have won or whatever. And so, it's just one of those spots where it was a hard moment. It stung or whatever, and just really cemented in me, you have to slow down. You cannot be making these kind of mistakes. You are trying too hard. You are going to too many tournaments. You're spending too much time. Slow down. Think about what matters. Make your plays well. You're a smart, handsome, capable man. Just do your thing, I throw the handsome there because if I ain't risen myself, how am I going to riz others? That's what I'm always saying. So, no, but jokes aside, like that really matters. And I slow down a lot, and it's just important, I think. Like, I think people play too quickly, and especially when there's Turbo Magic, 5 minutes on the clock, I'm never going to blame anyone who has, like, starting game 3 and makes some, like, sloppy errors. But if you're starting game 3 and there's, like, 35 minutes on the clock and you're playing against Burn, take that extra 2 seconds. It's chill. It's going to be okay. So.
What's your biggest Magic level up moment?
I think my biggest Magic level up moment was when I was I wish I could remember the exact details of it, but I was talking to Autumn. We were talking about the blue-black sewer deck, which was like Scarab God, Goblin Chain Whirler. And Autumn talks about like some play pattern thing. Yeah, they do this, so you're probably going to do this, so you do that, or whatever. And then they said, but we could do it this way instead. And it was just the idea of like, oh yeah, like the ABC thing I had done before, that wasn't new. But it was like, yeah, if we know they're going to play Chain Whirler on 3, and normally we would play Glint Sleeve Siphoner on 2, they might wait as well. So we can maybe do something like hold up an Essence Scatter pass. If they slam, we Essence Scatter. But then we can bait them on 4 by going Glint Sleeve plus Essence Scatter to get them. And that was a big level up moment of just trying to like not only think about how the games go, but how can I maneuver my opponent to do what I want them to do? Which is like, oh, you want your Goblin Chain Whirler value. Here, let me do this thing that's tempting to you, And also, under the same lines, I'm not doing anything. Don't extend into my kill spells or anything like that, And now they're getting got, So that would be, I think, one of my bigger level up moments.
Who's the Magic player that's had the biggest influence on you as a Magic player?
So my local friend Trey, definitely like Trey McLarnon, took me under his wing early on into Magic and helped me like catch up to speed with everyone else, and like was much better than me, but took time to like play Magic online with me. We would play all the time and work together on things and taught me a lot of lessons. So like he's one, but like another one that jumps out to me is like Autumn definitely taught me a bunch of stuff like we just talked about without ever really like sitting down and doing it. Another one is like Harlan Fear taught me some stuff with the way he thinks about the game back when I was on Nova for a little while. I learned a lot from Jerry, both eventually becoming his friend and talking to him, but also just listening to him via his podcast played a big part in it. Spencer in like a very similar way, where listening to his podcast eventually became friends with him. It's hard to nail down one person. I would say one of my biggest strengths is learning from other people and taking their life lessons and applying it to myself. So I wish I had a more concrete answer, but I think it's all of them. And if I had to say one person who I'm like not super duper close with that like didn't have an impact on me, it's probably someone like either like PV or Javier. Like Javier, I've
You mean
gotten to
just
know a
due to
little
their
bit.
body of work, like it influenced you?
Yeah, like Javier and I are like I would say acquaintances now. Like we played at that pro tour, all be one, and then we did the Super League and we chit chat a little bit, And he's very nice, and we've talked at like I think it was World, we bumped into each other and spoke, but like we're definitely not like I'm not like this with Javier. But I
Hmm.
think we would say hi to each other and like maybe have dinner. So like I guess I would probably say him. I also think my classic soapbox moment of Javier is like one of the best Magic players of all time, very clearly, and I believe the fact that he is not an American is why people don't recognize him as such. Even though, like, I
Less
think a lot
visibility.
of players who are in franchise get it that Javier is good, but a lot of people who are in franchise don't realize like Nathan was having a crazy year and Javier was like right here. And Javier's
Uh-huh.
also been doing that for years and like been the world champion too.
Sure,
So
crushing for years. Yeah.
yeah, that guy's definitely taught me a lot via watching his play. So there's a lot of people, and I learned a lot from people at Grand Prix talking to them and going to SCGs and getting to know these people and just listening to like the way like Edgar Magalhaes and Matthew Dilks,
Mm-hmm.
excuse me, like talked about Amulet and like listening to that and like Dom Harvey and like his approach to things and like all these different people. I think
Mm-hmm.
I learned a bunch. I learned a lot from Kane and Abe and just I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I learned a lot from a lot of people. So
Mm-hmm.
I guess
Well,
gun to my head,
that's
I'll say Trey, since he helped catch me up to speed.
sure. But
So
yeah, you're synthesizing from so many
mm,
different sources, standing on the shoulders of giants, as it were.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
What's your favorite magic related travel story?
At one event, I can't remember. I think it was maybe a Vegas, but I'm flying back, and I have like a connecting flight. No, we can't in Vegas. I had a connecting flight, but I'm flying back from some place, and I'm like working on an article. So I have like the Decked app on my phone. And I'm like building the deck list, and I'm like writing my article in notes, like outlines. So when I get home, I can like actually finish it up. And this person next to me is like, "Hey, I wasn't trying to eavesdrop or eavesdrop or whatever, but I saw your phone. Do you play Magic or whatever?" And I was like, "Oh yeah. Oh, it was DreamHack. That's what it was. I was coming back from DreamHack Dallas." And he was like, "Yeah." I was like, "Yeah, I do. Blah blah." And he was like, "Oh, did you play this tournament this weekend?" And I go, "Yeah, I won it." That's why I remember it now. But I just remember there was something that happened that was very funny, and he was like, "Oh dang."
Yeah.
But yeah, that was it. And I'm sure there's much better, funnier ones or whatever. But on the spot, I can't remember them, and
Sure.
I feel like I'm missing some all timer story, but it's just not popping up to me right now.
That's okay. That's the one that comes to mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. The random
Mhm.
airplane or
Mhm.
stranger moment kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. And they didn't know that people could like make a living playing Magic, so we talked about that. It was fun.
I know that one of your favorite movies is The Social Network. What do you love about this movie and why?
I see you talk to Trey. I, well, there's a couple things I like about the Social Network. So one, I think it is an interesting idea for a movie to talk about this thing that like when the Social Network came out, it was like 2013, I think 12. So like we were in the era of social media, but not even in the way we are now, right? And I think it's interesting to take a look on it, and it is like a dramatization of like these real events, and it's very much like
It's the
artistic.
Sorkin Fincher view of
Exactly. Yeah,
events.
Sorkin definitely took some things, and like I've heard like what Zuckerberg had to say on stuff, and like my understanding is like the girl from which they sort of pivot the whole movie around at the beginning isn't even like a real girl because Zuckerberg had been dating like this same girl basically off and on, or maybe his whole life before then. But I say this all to say I thought it was a really interesting character piece. And I think it was also a really interesting idea, and I think the writing's really dynamic. I think it's like snappy. I really like Sorkin's stuff in general. So like, I'm kind of a sucker for those kind of things. But I think the Social Network is just like a fairly good thing, like a fairly just good movie, and it's just enjoyable. And I think there are a lot of like also kind of memey iconic things that come from it. Like earlier I made actually a reference, right? I said drop the Stoyer, Nathan's cleaner. Like that's a
Mhm.
reference to like in the thing the guy from MySpace is saying drop the on Facebook. And like I'm coming back for everything. Like one of my favorite posts I ever made was I took the guy from that scene, Andrew Garfield, and I put Ragavan's face on it, and it said next turn I'm
Mhm.
coming back for everything. And it's just like I don't know, like the movie just kind of sticks out of my mind. And I know because a little behind the scene, James asked me who are some people I should reach out to, and one of them was my friend Trey, and we have this in joke where no matter what movie's coming out or someone's talking about like a greatest movie of all time, I always just kind of go like, yeah, but The Social Network, am I right? So I can tell that he's sort of thrown me under the bus in real time here,
Okay.
and making me defend
Okay.
myself. But I do really like the movie. I gladly watch The Social Network right now. You know, it's been like a year or two. I think
Yeah.
it is like snappy and fun or whatever. It is an interesting concept, but also in joke with my friend Trey that it's clearly the greatest movie of your, mine, and every generation. So you want to watch
Clearly.
The Social Network instead? Yeah.
Clearly.
So
That's crazy. I haven't watched it in a while. I should probably revisit it. I'm just a big fan of like David Fincher's movies. Like I've
Yeah.
watched The Killer twice already this year on Netflix,
Oh,
just because
interesting.
he directed it, and I generally watch movies because of the direction.
Mhm.
So that's something weird about me that I guess it's unnecessary to share. But
Yeah, can I ask you a
yeah,
question?
yeah.
What
Sure.
was your favorite part of The Killer? Because I wanted to like The Killer, and I watched it all, but I would just say it was fine. Like I wish I loved it, but I just didn't love it.
There's
So
a
I'm
lot of things about the plot that just don't make sense.
Yes,
And I think okay. I'm gonna try to say this without
it had
spoiling
style.
it.
I'll say that.
like okay, I think there's two things that work for me for the movie. One is that it's actually kind of a social commentary on David Fincher himself. Like here's a guy that was basically like beaten around by Hollywood, is now able to like create a movie that he wants, basically a blank check because of Netflix. And it's a kind of commentary on himself, his own arc as a director. Like The Killer is essentially Fincher. It's like here's somebody who is now able to go off into the sunset, who is wronged, who doesn't take it too seriously, because there's these little monologues in the movie about how like people are born every second, and like what am I doing? Like there's this very existential, like I don't know what to call it. Like it's a very postmodern thing about how like it is actually it's actually about him, like David Fincher, the killer. The other thing I really like is that the plot does and doesn't make sense. Like without spoiling it, like what he does at the end does not make sense. Like, right? But it's also really darkly funny because like he's actually not very good at his job, which kind of is related to like point one. Like he actually is not very good. Like he actually miscalculates a lot of things during the movie. You kind of think he's just this badass killer, but he actually screws up like a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And it's like there's no like self-reflection on that. It's kind of like the Magic player who's like, why am I losing these tournaments? Like I am the greatest Magic player ever. Why am I losing these tournaments? And it's like even like administering like the wrong dosage to the dog. Like I don't think I'm spoiling anything, but it's like there's these like miscalculations that are just really funny if you think about it. It's also a commentary on like David Fincher himself as a creative force. So it's a very like tongue-in-cheek movie. Like it's just surface level, it's not remarkable, but if you actually follow like Fincher's movies and body of work, like it actually makes sense. Like I could and the Morrissey soundtrack is also funny because like Morrissey is kind of like having his moment of like being canceled this year, so it's like a very weird choice to use the Smiths as music for the movie. There's just stuff like that that's really interesting.
I will say this along that same line. I do kind of agree. He kind of talks like he's this like he is the hitman from like the Hitman games almost. He's like, I'm the elite assassin, and it's like, oh shit, and then like this thing goes wrong. And it's very similar to that. Like he hides out in a WeWorks at the beginning. Like a spoiler for like the first scene in the movie, he's like hiding in a WeWorks, which looks like a very official type company until you really learn about it. So it's very interesting, I guess, actually, because I hadn't made that connection until you sort of said it. But I was like, yeah, he was in a WeWorks, which kind of is like him. Have you read the graphic novels that this is based off of?
I have not. Is it you have, or
I have not. I've heard the graphic novels that some of the stuff that makes it not make sense is in there, and that basically was an artistic choice to leave that out. And I've heard they're very good and just underappreciated. So it's one of those things where like one day I'll maybe get around to it once I've like my palate's
There's
cleansed.
also some weird stuff. Like again, this is towards the beginning, so hopefully I'm not spoiling anything. I feel like we're like dancing around spoilers, but like it doesn't make sense to me how like he just wakes up from his nap and his heart rate is so high. Like if he's so used to like killing people, why is his heart rate like so high where like it's not starting at like just 60 where he can just make the kill shot. It's just like there's stuff like that. It's just like
Mhm.
perplexing to me, especially on the second watch.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I definitely miss some of that stuff. It's interesting. Maybe someday I'll give it another try once I'm a
Yeah,
little removed from it.
it's also movies are also just kind of weird
Hmm.
now. It's like they've become something, and this is like old man James yelling at clouds. It's like
Hmm.
it's not something that I even have to go to the theater for. Like it's just something that plays in the background now. Like it's
Hmm.
not no longer an event. It's like it's kind of like if we use Magic as an analogy, I can now grind Magic online whenever I want. I used to have to like wait for like the weekly Magic tournament to like and think about it and like
Hmm.
go there and do it, right? And now I can just fire up like Arena or online whenever I want. And it's like it's sort of lost its kind of mystique in a way because
Hmm.
like I can always just do it. It's always in the background. I can
Yeah.
always watch a Magic stream, right? So
Hmm. Yeah.
yeah.
Magic's
Anywho,
dope though.
that's yeah.
Yeah.
Um, all right. Why is it that you're a fan of There Will Be Blood?
So
That's another favorite of yours, right?
yeah,
Is there something to do with the Magic grind and the story, or what?
when I say I'm a Magic grinder, you'll have to agree. No, but I really like Daniel Day Lewis. I think he's a great actor. I really like. I I will say this, that I really like the story for the most part. I think it drags a little at certain points. But I like its commitment to sort of like telling this story, no holds bars, very similar to what it is. Like one critique I think of the movie that's a very fair one is that women don't speak in the movie. And there's like I think it's like 3 or 4 lines of dialogue, but I think it's an artistic choice from I can't remember who the director was for the movie, but
P.T. Anderson.
P.T. Anderson, thank you. I think it's like an artistic choice that like this guy is like one, he is like a dude from that era who doesn't respect women. So he like it's the whole story is told from his perspective, and it's like he doesn't care what women have to think because he thinks they're dumb. Obviously that's not reasonable, but like he has that viewpoint, and it's like you have to basically accept that you are watching a bad person. This is a bad guy. He is not someone
This
to
is a
look up
bad
to.
man. Yes.
Yeah,
Hmm.
exactly. And he is very self-centered and very egotistical and very driven by profit above all else. And it's very interesting to see sort of his rise and fall and see him push away everyone else and to see him break, and like he's no better than Eli. Like
Hmm.
Eli is like a spoiler for a 2008 movie, as like this preacher in town that he very much hates, and he and Eli the whole movie are like pushing back and forth at each other and like getting each other to like basically show their hand that like we're not good people and we are just
Hmm.
here for the money, and force them to do stuff. And in the
Hmm.
movie, like you could argue Eli loses if you want to see things that way, but like really, Daniel Day Lewis's character, whose name is escaping me at the moment, he like succumbs to his stuff and like lets his emotions get the better of him, and
Hmm.
he, in his own words, he finishes himself. He ends it
Hmm.
all, and like kind of ruins everything he worked for because of his pride. He's going to end up in like not a very happy situation because of his choices. So I
Yeah.
really like that movie. I think it is very good. I think it also, and I think it has some very iconic scenes too that are very,
Oh, for
fun.
sure.
Like I'll drink, I drink your milkshake, I drink it up, and like
Hmm.
slurps it up, and like if I say I'm an oil man, you'd have to agree, and
Hmm.
um, when like his son, there's an iconic scene where this oil rig goes on fire and explodes, and his boy ends
Hmm.
up becoming deaf, and there's like oil rushing out of the ground, and he's like covered in oil. The fire is lighting up his
Hmm.
eyes, and he's staring at it. And his like
Hmm.
co-owner comes over and goes, "How's the boy?" And he goes, "Not good." And he just like
Yeah.
stares at basically all of his money because he doesn't care. The kid was just
Yeah.
a thing to get more sales so he could be a father and son company. He doesn't need the kid anymore. It's
Yeah.
all about the money for him. And it's an
Yeah.
awful person, but I find it so interesting to watch. This person is so antithetical to me and like I think to most people. So
I'm right with you. Like,
yeah.
there's a couple things, right? One you said, which is like, I think you sort of implied.
Mhm.
I'm sort of taking it is like it is very like it has very iconic imagery. It has
Mhm.
like very memorable moments. Like I would argue even the opening moment where he's trying to like find something out of that rock, like
Mhm.
that is like something that really sticks with me.
Yeah.
It is basically like the American dream, like in a story. Like because it's based on the book, and it's like it very much is about that, and it's also about, as you said, like pride before the fall. Like it's about like losing self-control, and that's the real loss, right? And I'll add another one. Like I again, I love the direction. I love the way the movie's made. The Johnny Greenwood score is also amazing. Like, so it's got all these things. I feel like now, having talked to you, I need to rewatch it. So
Yeah, yeah, it's very good. I watched it about a year ago. I think I watch it every 2 or 3 years, so I'm probably a little too soon on the rewatch, but it is very, very good. A movie that I would say is up there while we're on this topic is Whiplash. I think Whiplash.
Oh, dude, yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I think I've watched it like 3 times already. So
I've seen it once, and I think you're friends with Harlan Fear. I think he and I
yeah.
we were like we had this Discord called Corn Hub during the pandemic when things were wild, and we would watch movies sometimes together after we'd all play Among Us. And I remember like he and myself, my friend Bob and Cheese, my friend Baker, we watched it, and it was very good. And it was a movie that I was like, I think this is a top 10 movie for me, but I've got to give it time to like digest and then go back and watch it again before I can write it off. But I think that might be what my plan is for tonight. I'm going to go work out after this.
Okay.
And I'm going to go watch Whiplash again because Whiplash,
Okay.
like that is a movie where like if you are someone who competes in something, you're probably going to love that
Yeah.
movie and it's going to really ring home for you. And it is so good.
It's so good, and that's actually my favorite game podcast episode of all time. Is when they talk about Whiplash. There's an episode where Jerry T and Brian talk about the movie, and if you haven't listened to that, like it was actually still called Game Podcast before Arena Deckless. That's the episode. Like they actually talk about that.
Yeah, I guess Arena Deckless happens before COVID, and I didn't watch the movie till COVID, so it's possible I just skipped the episode because I was like, I haven't seen this movie. I'm gonna have to go back.
You should check it out. Like,
check it out.
Yeah, there's some real love within the Magic community for that movie, and obviously it's about unhealthy obsession, but it's so good. The performances are so good in that movie. Yeah, you should watch it again.
Have you seen Ping Pong the animation along the lines of this?
I have not. So you recommend it?
I recommend it highly. I think it's my favorite anime, and it is a very similar-ish type of vein to Whiplash, of like an unhealthy obsession with competing and competition. And I think it handles it from a lot of different angles, including the angle of like, I'm just not good enough, of like, I'm just never going to be that guy, and like, maybe I'll have like a good game or something, but I'll never be there. And I think Ping Pong, it's 11 episodes. It's on Crunchyroll now. It's very, very good. I think it is like a quintessential, if you like sort of those kind of whiplashy stories, this is like a more lighthearted but serious version of that. And it is a very unique artistic style, and it's all about ping pong. So
okay,
yeah.
That reminds me, I also have to watch Blue Lock. I think it's
Blue Lock's so good.
I've only watched maybe the first 2 episodes, and I feel like I need to get into that.
Yeah, Blue
Lock was a recommendation.
Yeah, that one I highly endorse as well. If you're someone who likes competing in things and like sports anime, Blue Lock is. I'm a big weeb. I love someone called me like a culture weeb. Yeah. I watch my stuff. I do my thing, but I don't make it my whole personality. I make Emrakul my personality.
Sure.
No.
All right.
But yeah.
All right, last question for you. So, what is it about Cardfight Vanguard? Was that because of your love for anime that you got into this game? As I understand it, it's the first card game you actually played seriously before Magic, right?
Yeah, it's a card game I competed in and did very well, and like my friends also did very well. And like one of my like local friends who still plays the game, I saw on Facebook the other day, he got back to Worlds again. That game's still going. I think that's his second or third time. Jordan was just insane at that game.
How do you describe this game for people that are only thinking of it in Magic terms?
So it's crazy because the game basically rebooted with the same IP as my understanding. My understanding now is that it is very much like, I guess the best way to maybe describe it is, it's like the One Piece card game, if you've played that.
I was going to say, Japanese TCGs have their own vibe. Yeah.
Yeah. It is very much like a game with high resources. You see a lot of your deck. And unconventional ways to unlock those resources. So like traditionally when I played, it was a game that the closer you got to death, the more power, basically the more mana you had. But to play your more expensive spells, you must have a lower life total. So if you want to play your haymakers, you kind of like have to be like in a losing position. And that was just like a card, like we talked earlier about life, I told you a little bit of my story and I stopped playing card games. And eventually, I have to come back for us to be here. But what happened is I graduated high school. I go back. I start playing Yu-Gi-Oh. It's fine. But some guys who played Yu-Gi-Oh played Vanguard and I really liked it. I found it was just a really fun card game. And I just sort of kept playing and kept competing at it and really sort of grew and like learned a lot of things via the context of that. And then took that into Magic, And the reason I started playing Magic is I liked Cardfight Vanguard a lot. I was like I had a lot of fun playing. It was just a really good time. But the level of competition, people weren't taking it the same way, nor was the company. The company didn't want to make things competitive, which is fine. I totally understand that choice.
Yeah.
But to me, it was like, I want to see what it's like when people are trying. And that's the thing about Magic. One of the things I love the most, I don't think gets talked about enough, is I really love that you and me can both have the shared love of this game. We're both going to fly to Vegas to play in this $100,000 standard tournament. And you're going to put all this time in, I'm going to put all this time in, and only one of us gets to move forward at 1-0. And we get to compete and push each other and see that. And I just love playing someone who really cares. Like, when people don't care, I find it so much less, like, it's just not as entertaining.
There are stakes, right?
Yeah, I want, and the stakes can just be your pride. And I want you to care about winning and care about improving and that sort of thing. And when that happens, that is the most fun Magic can be, in my opinion.
Excellent.
Cool.
I think that's the best way to be as a competitive player is the self-improvement, but also knowing, like, taking pride in high-level competition. So, Mason, thank you so much for doing this conversation with me. I felt like it was really nice to kind of understand what you're about, who you are. I think that was the first question, and I felt like you've done an awesome job of answering it. So thank you for taking the time.
Thanks for having me on. I had a great time talking about this sort of stuff, and maybe someday in the future we'll have part 2 and I can talk about the things I learned while on the inside in more detail. And I'm super Chad Mason. That's very muscular and healthy. But until then,
we'll do a fitness podcast at some point.
Exactly. Yeah. Once I'm super Chad, we can then consider me coming back. But not until then. I gotta have a goal to work towards.
Gotta get to final form, Mason.
Exactly. Yeah. Cool.